Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Thousand Oaks City Council meeting for Tuesday, January 9th, 2018, and wish everybody a Happy New Year. If you please all rise and join me in Pledge of Allegiance. Ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, Madam Clerk. If you call the roll for tonight's meeting, please.
Councilmember Bill De La Pena.
Present.
Councilmember Price.
Here.
Councilmember Adam.
Here.
Councilmember McCoy.
Present.
Mayor Fox.
Here. Item number 4 is request for continuance for any public hearing agenda item. Do we have any items for continuing? All right, hearing none, we'll move to item 5, and that's special presentations. Give me a moment. Tonight we're honoring some very, very special folks. I'd like to invite Police Chief Tim Hagel and Fire Chief Ted Smith to the podium, along with Officer Jonathan Bentrup and Josh Richter to join me at the podium. And Deputy Commander Miller also here. Who wants to speak first? Okay, let me introduce our Fire Chief Ted Smith.
Thank you, Mayor, Mayor and Council. Happy New Year to everybody. I'd first like to call out Battalion Chief Bill Brooklander and Company Officer Captain Brendan Ribley, Truck Company 35, and Captain Mark Acevedo and crew out of Rescue Engine 31. Thank you for coming, gentlemen. Finest fire department in the world. City of Thousand Oaks. So we're here. So here tonight. Here. Sorry, Chief. First of all, I'd like to be remiss of me not to mention the tragedy that happened 0400 this morning. The city of Montecito was hit at a remnants of debris flow from this the Thomas fire. There is loss of life up there, and it's tragic what happened at this morning. The rain cells hit very hard in that area. Devastating rain hit. The vegetation was denuded of any kind of holdback. And the debris flow from the Thomas fire tragically hit a perfect alignment and washed down into the city of Montecito, and we're still doing an active search for survivors. But that community has been devastated. We do have resources up there. We've sent quite a few USAR task force, search and rescue, and engine companies up there to assist, along with the city of Los Angeles from Chief Fox's department and the Los Angeles County Fire Department and our joining agencies from Montecito, Santa Barbara, and Carpinteria. So I just ask everybody to keep everybody in their prayers for the citizens of Montecito, because it's been a devastating event today. But on a happier note, I'd like to start off today by recognizing these two deputies. Stand up here. You guys come stand up here, please. Chief Hagel, come stand here. So at about 0500 on December 24th, Christmas Eve, the Ventura County Fire Department received a call for a reported bedroom fire in Newbury Park. Ventura County Sheriff's units arrived on scene just prior to the Ventura County Fire Department's arrival of our Medic Engine 32 stationed in Newbury Park. Upon the arrival, the Sheriff's deputies Joshua Richter and Jonathan Bentrup entered a home with a fire extinguisher. They located a fire that was located in the front tactical right of the residence in the front room, and they found and located a fire surrounded on the bed and starting to ignite the surrounding furnitures. Deputies Richter and Bentrup then used a dry chemical extinguisher out of their vehicle, their service extinguisher, to partially extinguish the fire that was slowly showing progress of progressing and keeping the fire in check from growing and traveling upward toward the ceiling and adjacent furnishings. The female occupant was then led out by one of the deputies to the front yard and moved safely to the front, where she was accompanied and comforted by her next-door neighbor. The same neighbor offered a place for the residents to stay that night and was comforting as it was Christmas Eve. Medic Engine 32 shortly arrived after the officers Bentrup and Richter. The crews stretched a line off Engine 32 and off Engine 30 with fire hoses to the bedroom, ensuring that the fire was completely extinguished and hadn't extended further into the home. The resident was then soonly checked out by our fire paramedics for any exposures or injuries, and she was safe and unharmed, and from our point, and no medical issues at that point. To the credit of Sheriff Richter, Deputy Richter, and Bentrup, the house was saved from burning to the ground, because if it wasn't for their quick action, and by the time we were gone, the fire would have grown into the size that they would have well-established fire in the house, and it could have easily spread through the home, burning that house to the ground. Our ladder truck performed ventilation, removed the smoke from the evacuated the smoke from the house. The fire crews removed the burning bed and burned material from the home. And later that day, I believe the residents were actually be able to move back in. So without your heroic actions, gentlemen, and your quick and fearless efforts, I commend you on behalf of Fire Chief Mark Lorenzen. And I'd like to recognize you guys with what we do. We hold dearly to our distinguished firefighters and to Meritus Award, is I'd like to present you both with a challenge coin from the Ventura County Fire Department on behalf of my boss, Mark Lorenzen. There you go. Thank you. So, obviously, you guys have shown abilities and skills that, so I do have in my briefcase an application for Ventura County Fire Department, and I will be giving that to Chief Hagel with his approval, and then we'll sure see you guys in our next Fire Academy. With that, Council, thank you for letting me come up here and recognize these two great young gentlemen. Chief Hagel, would you like to say something?
So it does my heart well. This is a moment for these two, and what you see right here is a legacy of law enforcement in Thousand Oaks, and I couldn't be more proud. However, they hate public speaking, which, you know me, I'm a trickster. They're going to have to speak because I'm the boss, and that's what we do. But they do have one request, Chief. They said, with all of this heroic behavior, can they drive the fire truck? I tried, you guys. It's all right. Come on up, say hi.
Yeah, just thank you for the recognition. I really do appreciate it. I'm glad it worked out that day, and glad that her house didn't burn down and she was okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm sure any of our partners would have done the same thing, and we've got a good team out here, so thank you again.
So Josh and Jonathan, on behalf of the City of Thousand Oaks, it's my honor to present each of you a certificate of appreciation for your efforts. Josh, I think that was yours. Okay. Jonathan?
Thank you very much.
And just in a closing note, just so you know, we don't reciprocate in the fire service. When people start shooting, we're not going to jump in the way. Just so we're clear on that. It's okay. All right? Right, guys? All right. Okay. All right. Congratulations. Okay. Good way to start out the new year, that's for sure. All right, we'll move to item 6. That's our public comment. Madam Clerk, could you call public comment, please?
This is a time and place for public comments. A speaker card is available for those wishing to address the City Council regarding items on the agenda or on a subject within the city's jurisdiction. Speakers for public hearing items shall be called and heard during the public hearing. All remarks should be addressed to the council as a whole, and all documents for City Council and the official record should be presented to the City Clerk prior to speaking. Speakers are requested to state their name and community of residence for the record. Under state law, public comment matters may not be considered by the council unless listed on the agenda, but may be referred to the city manager for administrative follow-up. 6 individuals have presented cards, and pursuant to council standards, speakers are allowed 3 minutes, and the yellow light displays when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. Our first speaker is Adam Haverstock, followed by Steve Simmons. Good evening, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. Adam Haverstock. I'm the Director of Government Affairs and Tourism at the Greater Conejo Valley Chamber of Commerce. I came by tonight to give you our monthly Chamber of Commerce update, and I have a few items for you. First and foremost, a big thank you to Mayor Fox, who came and spoke at the Chamber of Commerce's Board of Directors meeting today at lunchtime. Thank you for carving some time out of your schedule. We do really appreciate it very much. There was lots of questions, lots of interest about things going on in the city, so I think it was time well spent. The Chamber of Commerce has launched a new website. The one I've been talking about for like 3 months is finally live. If you go to conejochamber.org, you can check it out, and it provides a lot of the same functionality we had on our existing website. It's really an update to the template, so that way it's now mobile responsive. It looks great on your cell phone. It looks great on your tablet. We think it's going to be much more accessible and get a lot more use because of the fact that you're able to use it on multiple devices. So when you have a sec, go ahead and check that out. Speaking of things you can do on your cell phone now on our website, we have our first major event coming up for the year. That is the State of the University at California Lutheran University. It's going to be on Friday, January 26th. It's a lunchtime event from 11:30 to 1:30 p.m. in the Lundring Event Center. And it will feature a keynote from Cal Lutheran President Dr. Chris Kimball. So you can get tickets for that event on conejochamber.org. So feel free to take a look and make those reservations today. And then finally, I wanted to give you an update on our tourism district. We are wrapping up our numbers for the year, and they were very, very strong. I've referenced often in these meetings the stat we use to track our progress, and that's the revenue per available room, or RevPAR for short. It mirrors the TOT essentially. And in order to hit our income projections for 2017, we needed to see a revenue per available room of $90 per room. And we actually think that number is going to come in somewhere a little over $100 a room. And so we're very, very happy with that, how that turned out. Obviously, the Thomas Fire happened at the end of the year, and we normally expect to see a dip in December because travel goes down, but we actually did see an increase because of not only folks that were displaced from the fire, but also a lot of service workers, people from medicine, people from other departments coming in to help assist with that fire, and so there is a silver lining there. And then just kind of a cool note, I'll probably give you more details at a future meeting, but the tourism district, we've decided to get on TV and radio this year, so more to come on that, but we think we've reached a period, we're transitioning, starting to think bigger, do some really cool things at a higher level, and so we're actually already on television in markets in southern Los Angeles County and northern Orange County, which is a target tourism market for us, and then we're also in radio in certain markets as well. So if you want more information, please let me know, and unless there are any questions, that does conclude my remarks this evening.
Thank you, Adam. Our next speaker is Steve Simmons, and following Mr. Simmons will be Karen Martin. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. My name is Steve Simmons. I'm a resident of Hauser Circle in Thousand Oaks. Recently, the city informed us they plan to extend a sewer line through our neighborhood, and we've spoken with the majority of residents on the street, some who are here tonight, and we're unclear what problem is being addressed by this project or why the city feels that this financial burden on the homeowners of our street is warranted. Phone calls to the city have had limited success in getting this information, which is why we're here tonight. There's no public health or safety issue on this street, as all septic systems have been maintained and are all working properly. One of these systems, in fact, was just recently installed on a newly constructed home by permit from the city. If this project does move forward, it will cost homeowners on our street tens of thousands of dollars per home in connection fees, home to sewer line plumbing, removal of existing septic systems, and other associated plumbing, landscaping work. Estimates on my own home come to approximately $40,000. Also, no home will be allowed to be sold without connecting, which means that if this project does go through, the values of all the affected homes will drop by tens of thousands of dollars should the homeowners decide to sell. So overall, we're opposed to this project and request that all work related to this project be halted pending a report review showing why this project is considered necessary at this time, despite the heavy financial burden it would place on the affected homeowners. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Karen Martin, and following Ms. Martin will be Stephen Shea. Good evening.
Hello, Karen Martin, Thousand Oaks. It's too loud on Lynn Road. I know when you feel the sound, it's too loud. When you wake up in the middle of the night with the blade wash from helicopters and think for a moment it's an earthquake, it's too loud. If you can't have a conversation inside your home if your windows are open, it's too loud. If you're outside and your vehicle noise hurts your ears, it's too loud. So I called the sheriff last summer and was told there's no money in the budget for patrol on Lynn Road. I called the Planning Commission and was told the city was planning to apply rubber asphalt in 2018. This method will reduce tire noise about 3%. It does nothing for acceleration of motorcycles, supercharged engines, and semi-tractor trailers. So I went to the Traffic Commission since their function is to review traffic problems and submit solutions to City Council. They sent representatives to reiterate there's no funding for patrol on Lynn Road. We have 6 motorcycle pads that are sitting empty, maybe 1 radar feedback sign when we were promised 4, and no patrol on one of the busiest arterials in the city. I was told by Carrie Finley to call Carrie Finley, senior planner, who told me that they only deal with new construction and suggested code compliance. Code compliance doesn't handle traffic noise and passed my call to Captain Aguilar, who didn't call. County supervisor tells me Lynn Ranch is unincorporated, so go to the city. So back to the Traffic Commission in September. That elicited a call from city engineer who provided me with a sound study done in 2009 by Los Robles. Sound levels were measured at rush hour only at 74 decibel, well over the 65 decibel that is conditionally acceptable and warrant a sound wall for Conejo Oaks in 1995. Freeway noise is monotonous. Lynn Road is not. 50% of the traffic exceeds the posted limit. Since this study, the hospital got its trauma center and stroke certification. CLU has expanded. The Rams opened a training facility, and the Titanic's at the Reagan Library. I reached out to the city attorney, whose function includes helping our citizens obtain legal information on ordinances, and I'm assuming this is noise ordinances, and was told to contact Planning Commission. In desperation, I went to the city budget and found a subset of community development labeled environmental services, whose function is to deal with California Environmental Quality Act issues. In the budget, professional services expenses went from $500 in 2016 and 17 to $300,000 in 2018. When I called the city, no one knew of this division. I would appreciate a call from this entity. Perhaps a sound wall is the solution instead of the patchwork of fences that is the responsibility of homeowners. Let's use that $1 million allotment from the Dos Vientos project for some new noise and traffic studies. Perhaps a roundabout. Perhaps more plantings. Perhaps policing. There is a noise problem. It's a health issue, and I'm asking for a solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martin.
I also provided you with all of my data, so there, if you want to reference it, it's available for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Stephen Shea. Following Mr. Shea will be Janice Weiss. Good evening, Mr. Shea.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I, too, am a member of the Hauser Circle group, and although Mr. Simmons spoke eloquently and pretty thoroughly on the subject, I'd like to add that within the last few years, we had the URBS expansion and widening project, sidewalk, et cetera. And one of the things that we recognize is that it went quite a bit longer and took quite a bit more money than originally anticipated, in part because of the patchwork of maps that were available to the city for underground pipes, gas pipes, water pipes, et cetera. So all of our septic tanks do function. I've lived here 5 years. I came from living over in Malibu as a renter for 25 years. And for all of us who live with a septic tank, we all know how to take care of them. They all work very well. They're all very efficient. And essentially it would be a tax on all of us, 12, 15 of us, of many tens of thousands of dollars. And as Steve pointed out, it would be a direct tax against our ability to sell our house if and when we choose to do it. We love our neighborhood. It is the greatest neighborhood in Thousand Oaks. So if anyone up there is looking to buy a house and one comes up, it's excellent. And putting this sewer through won't change our quality of lives, and nor will it really improve anything that, to the best of my knowledge, that the city of Thousand Oaks will be paying quite a bit of money for and passing on to us. So I appreciate your listening, and I look forward to hearing what does happen. We get right at the point, we're getting quite a bit of we don't knows from Public Works, and kind of, well, you should kind of passing on what she knows, which is not very much, and she refers us to the federal government and certain standards that they have regarding water, et cetera. And I think it's quite confusing for her and us. So we'd like to further this and hope that we hear from you guys, and then we can once again come and address you. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Shea, thanks. Janice Weiss, and our last speaker will be Alan Golub. Good evening, Ms. Weiss.
Good evening. Happy New Year. The last time I was here, I was working for the YMCA, and we were funded for our sports facility endowment grant that night, so I wanted to thank you for that. And now I am the Director of Community Relations for Art Trek. Art Trek is your community art studio. We're a nonprofit organization. We bring quality art to the classroom and the community. We just entered into a partnership with Safe Passages with Chief Tim Hagel the other day, and we're trying to serve a lot of people in the community, and there are a lot of underserved people who are walking distance to Art Trek, but nobody can walk there. Our challenge is Rancho Conejo Boulevard does not have any sidewalks. And I believe that the businesses there have changed a lot because there are a lot of businesses that people would walk to if they could. There are apartments nearby. There's Venture Park and Hillcrest Apartments, Casa Oaks Apartments are all walking distance, and there are children there who could really benefit from our programs, and they can't walk there. And we are not able to walk to any of the restaurants or anything that is near us on Rancho Conejo Boulevard. So I'm here tonight just asking, how do we start the process of figuring out how to get sidewalks and crosswalks in that area that is, now there are a lot of pedestrians there, and it is really treacherous. You can't walk there at all. So I was just wondering if you could help me with what the first steps are.
Okay, well, somebody will probably contact you there after public
perfect.
comment.
Thank you.
Our last speaker is Alan Golub. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mayor Fox, members of the council. My name is Alan Golub. I live in Hayden, Idaho. I flew down this morning to see my mom, but I just want to wish, I've heard great things about this city council and the city. As a young man at 5, I got to meet Ham, the first chimp into space, and he was from Jungle Land. I think it was right around this location. But in '96, my parents and I had a manufacturing facility in Canoga Park, but we moved it up to Hayden, Idaho. And in my own family, my aunt and uncle, Harmon and Eleanor Rasnow, are up on the hill. But I just want to recognize my mother, Susie Golub. At 93, she was your longest volunteer for 17 years after my dad died. And I just came down to wish you great success in 2018. Thank you.
Very kind. We appreciate it. Have a safe trip home. That concludes our public comment for this evening. Let me turn it over to the city manager, Mr. Powers, for some follow-up comments.
Thank you so much, Mayor Fox. Just a few follow-up items for those speakers that has some specific items. As it relates to the Hauser Circle issue, as city engineer, Cliff Finley to step out, and if those residents want to step into the lobby there, Mr. Finley will be happy to chat with you. Mrs. Martin's concerns regarding Lynn Road, traffic enforcement, and noise issues there. As she mentioned, she has talked to a number of staff members, Chief Tim Hagel and Public Works Director Jay Spurgeon. Mrs. Martin will step into the lobby and chat with you. And as it relates to sidewalks, Mrs. Weiss's concerns regarding sidewalks in Rancho Conejo, that's certainly something that we've discussed, and something that some of our businesses have brought up recently. So I'll ask our economic development manager, if Haider Alawami, if he doesn't mind stepping out into the lobby and chatting with Mrs. Weiss. That is it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Powers. Item 7 is the consent calendar. Any items council wishes to call special on these? All right, hearing none, do we have a motion for the consent calendar? Mr. Price.
I will move the consent calendar.
Mr. Price moves the consent calendar. Discussion on the motion? Hearing none, for the vote. Vote, please.
The motion passes 5-0, and I have an ordinance title. Ordinance approving joint powers agreement for Los Angeles Community Choice Energy Authority and authorizing implementation of Community Choice Aggregation Program, ordinance number 1640 NS.
All right, and that is approved. We'll move to item 8A. That's our first public hearing for tonight. And Madam Clerk, could you call 8A for public hearing, please?
Hearing advertised as required by law is open to consider agenda item 8A, reauthorize ordinance reestablishing fee to support public, educational, and government channel capital expenditures. A speaker card is available for those wishing to address the City Council regarding this public hearing, and we do not have any public speakers at this time.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. To provide the staff report will be our Finance Director. Always a riveting presentation, Mr. John Adams.
Happy New Year, Mayor Fox, City
Year.
Council. I'll try to make this as quick as possible. So tonight, staff is in front of you to ask Council to reauthorize the franchise ordinance and city PEG fee program. So just quickly, a little background on DIFCA, which is the Digital Infrastructure and Video Competition Act of 2006, which was a law that moved franchising of cable operators from local agencies to the state. This did give an exemption for current agencies that had current franchise agreements that were binding and would be in effect until those expiration dates. It does authorize 5% of operators' gross income to be paid for franchise fees. It also provides 1% in PEG funding to support local access programs. Just quickly, the PEG ordinance was initially adopted in 2009, and this was in compliance with the Act. It established the 1% PEG fees. PEG funds are restricted to capital improvements or capital expenditures for TOTV. Over the past 5 years, we've averaged about $400,000 on an annual basis. Just a little history on TOTV, which was established in 1987, provides direct non-editorial information to residents, actually is providing tonight's live cable cast of the City Council meeting, provides 24/7 access to city government information. So currently we only have one franchise agreement for the city, and that is with Frontier Communications, which was formerly Verizon. That agreement is in effect until 2021. There are 3 other state franchises that are in place currently. One is with Charter Communications, Time Warner, which people know in the community as Spectrum, which is owned by Charter Communications, and then the final one, which is AT&T. So quickly, we received communication from Charter that their state franchise expired January 1st. It was renewed by the state January 2nd of 2018, which was just last week. They interpret our ordinance and the law that we have to have our PEG ordinance reauthorized, and so that is why staff is in front of council tonight to ask for that reauthorization of the ordinance, and to also amend the ordinance to have automatic reauthorizations when state franchise agreements are extended or renewed. And so tonight, the recommendation is to reauthorize the city's PEG fees and to create the automatic reauthorization when state franchises come up and are renewed by the state. And with that, myself and Mr. Patrick Heher, Assistant City Attorney, are available for any questions by the City Council.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Adams. Questions for Mr. Adams on this item? Ms. Bill de la Pena.
Thank you. I have a quick question regarding Frontier Communications. So this agreement that we currently have with them will expire in September of 2021.
That is correct. And at that point, it will fall under the state franchising process.
What influence will we have after that in terms of improving customer service and other areas from which or about which we have received numerous complaints over the last 18 to 24 months?
I'm going to defer that to Mr. Heher.
Thank you. The state franchise does have a very broad requirement that video providers respond to customers in a certain time frame. When we had the city ordinances and the franchise agreements, we had a little bit more control, and we had certainly much more focus with our own ability to have an employee or a staff member contact not only the residents but also work as a liaison with the various video providers. You are correct that obviously if we get away from a city franchise, we lose that personal touch, if you will, that ability to contact them, a one-on-one relationship type of situation. But there are some requirements in the state franchise that they must provide services and a time period in which to respond to complaints. Again, I think with Frontier, they took over Verizon, and we understand that there were some obvious difficulties with that transaction.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, we have no speaker cards in this item, and it is a public hearing, so I'm going to close the public hearing and entertain a motion. Mr. Adam.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'll move reauthorization of the PEG fee.
All right, Mr. Adam moves. Discussion on his motion? Hearing none, prepare the vote. Vote, please.
The motion passes 5-0, and your ordinance title is an ordinance reauthorizing city's public educational and governmental access support fee and amending Section 7.2 of Chapter 7 to Thousand Oaks Ordinance Number 1242 NS and 1511 NS, respectively.
All right, and that is approved. Item 9A is department reports, and Mr. Town, you're going to provide the first report on item 9A. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. This item involves really two things. It involves the initiation of amendments to the general plan land use element of the city and conforming zone changes to essentially align the actual density with the general plan land use density for various areas in the city. In terms of background, this is related to Measure E, which was a measure approved by voters back in 1996 that requires voter approval of any change in the city's general plan land use element that would increase the maximum amount of either residential density or total commercial acreage throughout the city. In 2005, the City Council weighed in on this as a follow-up item and voted that Council could approve a change in residential land use designation without a vote if it does not increase the maximum number of units for residential use over that which existed in 1996. The idea was to maintain that threshold that existed in 1996 and never exceed it. Since then, units have been placed into a citywide Measure E pool and also have been taken from it and applied to specific projects, both through the general plan amendment process. That's how Measure E really works on a day-to-day basis. Again, with the overall mandate that we can never exceed the residential capacity that existed in 1996. More recently, last year, Council directed staff to conduct a comprehensive analysis of the residential baseline, that maximum capacity that is denoted by the land use map itself, as it existed when Measure E was approved, that had never been done prior. We had basically kept careful control of general plan amendments, putting units into a citywide pool, and general plan amendments taking them out for specific projects to ensure that we never exceeded that maximum capacity. Through that process, there were about 1,000 acres that were identified throughout the city where the actual density for those areas was at an entirely lower category than the general plan designated for those areas. So they were developed at a lower density. And that equates to a potential capacity of an additional 5,400 units for the Measure E pool if they were all processed through general plan amendments. At the October 24th meeting, you directed staff to identify general plan amendments to only potentially capture a small portion of this overall number. You directed staff to look at 20% of those units and to bring back to you what we're considering tonight, and that is a batch of general plan amendments to be initiated tonight, and then as I'll describe later, we'll go through our standard process. Also, last October, you asked staff to address two other items and bring those back to you. One was how council should consider allocation of the units that could be added to this citywide pool. That is, what criteria, what variables are relevant as you decide which projects merit receipt of these units if they are added. In addition, you asked that staff put together the parameters, issues such as timeframes, costs, key elements, key challenges, key benefits that would relate to a comprehensive general plan update. Historically, we have updated individual elements of the general plan. As you well know, in recent years, we've updated the housing element, open space element, conservation element, safety element. But what we're talking about here is a comprehensive general plan update. So staff will be bringing these two items back to you prior to your final consideration of these general plan amendments. We are working on both of them, and they will be back before you make your final determination with regard to these potential general plan amendments, so that you have all the information that you had asked for prior to that decision. So one might ask, what were the criteria that staff used to identify areas for potential general plan amendments? And there were really just a few fundamental items. We looked at small to medium-sized areas so that they could be dispersed geographically throughout the city, not focusing on just one or two areas, but a number of areas, and obviously that they had to add up to approximately 1,080 units per your direction to us. And through that process, we identified 7 areas for potential amendments. And you probably recognize this image. This is from the October 2017 staff report. And what this shows us are really actually 3 things. Shows in the light blue areas that were built at lower than maximum density according to our general plan, and you can see that the vast majority of the city was actually built at a lower density, which is really not surprising. That's common in many cities. But the dark blue from this image denotes those areas that were built at an entirely lower general plan density category, an entirely lower density than they are shown as on the general plan. And so based on this map and those criteria that I just mentioned, we identified 7 areas for potential GPAs, acronym for general plan amendments, and those are shown with these red dots. So as you can see, they're scattered from the west end of the city to sort of the east end, and a number sort of in the central, north, and south. So if these general plan amendments are processed, they would add 1,088 units to the Measure E pool. And as a point of reference, currently we have 2 pools out there. We have one just for the Thousand Oaks Boulevard specific plan that currently has 124 units in it. And then citywide, we have about 430 units. One other important note in this process, this is not just about general plan amendments to align densities. It also does help to protect neighborhoods from potential, and although it could be a somewhat long shot, but it is a reality to protect neighborhoods from potential increases over the long haul in terms of density of development. So let's take a closer look at these 7 areas. The site number 1, first area, is out in the Dos Vientos area on the west side of Villa Las Brisas, right here. And to the south would be Lynn Road. Actually, you can see just a bit of it right here. So Lynn, Via Las Brisas, West Side, and I think that'll orient most viewers. And so let's look at this for just a moment. If you look on the right side of the image, you see a table which probably looks a little familiar for those of you who looked at this back in October. But these are the residential density categories from our general plan. We have high, which equates to 15 to 30 units per net acre. Medium, which is 4.6 to 15. Low, 2 to 4.5. And very low, 0 to 2. So these categories are depicted on our general plan land use map, of which this is a small excerpt. So again, Site 1, west side of Via Las Brisas, it is this area. And if you note on this exhibit, and per the label, this area is designated today on our general plan land use map as being medium density. Okay, medium density. And if we go back to our table, medium density is defined in our general plan as 4.6 to 15 units per net acre. So 4.6 to 15. But that area was actually developed at 3.5 units per net acre. So it is shown as medium density on our general plan land use map, but it was developed at low. So what staff is suggesting is that City Council consider redesignating this area from medium density to low density to reflect the actual density which is within the range for low. So this area would change in color, it would change in designation to match the actual density that we see in the field today, that we see on the ground. That's the basic process that I will be going through for all of the 7 sites. Site number 2 is on the north side of Hillcrest Drive. This is opposite the Oaks Mall, west of McLeod. Here's Hillcrest, McLeod, Tuolumne, and this is an area much smaller in size that was originally designated and is today as high density. But again, if we look at our table on the right side, it was developed at a low density. It's actually a low density condominium project, but it was originally anticipated that it would be an apartment project, as is the adjacent property to the east. So here we are suggesting that for this area, the general plan designation be changed from high density to low to match the actual density of 3.8 dwelling units per net acre. Site 3, not too far away. This is on the north side of Gainsborough at Grand Oak. For reference, this is Tarantula Hill, and the Botanic Gardens are just over here to the, actually, gosh, right there is the Botanical Garden property. This area also designated today as high density on our general plan land use map, but as you can see on the right side of this image, actually built at 4.9 units per net acre. So we are suggesting changing it from high to medium. The 4th site is on the east side of Moore Park, south of the 101 freeway. This is bordered by Rolling Oaks and Los Padres. And this area is shown as medium on our general plan, but was developed at 3.4 units per net acre, or in the low density category. Hence, we are recommending a medium to low density change. The 5th site is the Bridgehaven Tract on the north side of East Potrero Road. This is Westlake Boulevard, as you can see, is right here for reference. So this is an enclave here surrounded by open space. This area shown as low density on our general plan map actually developed at very low. So again, suggesting a change from low to very low to reflect the actual density on the ground. 6th site is really at the crown of Westlake Boulevard as you head basically from North Ranch to Lang Ranch on the right-hand side or east side. This is a tract along Allison Court. And this area was designated for low density development, as is the adjacent tract to the north and to the west, but it was actually developed at 1.5 units per acre. So we are suggesting that you consider changing the general plan land use designation from low to very low. And then the last site is up in the Sunset Hills area. This is at Cayo Rochelle on the west side of the 23 freeway. Here is Sunset Hills Boulevard for reference, and obviously the freeway right there. And this site also designated as medium, and it was actually developed at a low density, and so we are recommending that you consider that general plan amendment. Now, should the council opt to proceed to initiate these general plan amendments, staff is also recommending that you authorize us to process conforming zone changes so that the density of the zoning matches the density of the general plan. Land use map, these we consider to really be cleanup items. They will not result in any substantive impact on how property owners can use their property. In terms of potential reallocation sites, you asked that we also identify potential sites where these units, if they're added to the Measure A pool, could be used. And I think a good point of reference is the city's economic development strategic plan. It was adopted last September, and it identified a half dozen development opportunity sites, as they were coined in that study, basically along the 101 corridor. Include sites such as Borchard Road site on the west side of Rancho, the Oaks Mall area on the east side, the west side properties just is in front of City Hall on the west side of Dallas, the former Kmart site, the vacant property at Thousand Oaks Boulevard in Hodenkamp, where Christmas trees and pumpkins are sold, and the Kelly Road site, which is currently shown for commercial development. There are other sites, though, around the city. As you know, the Pinecrest School site, you had previously considered a general plan amendment for that property to allow residential instead of school use. And then various other properties within the Thousand Oaks Boulevard specific plan come up on a regular basis for potential development. And I should just note, it's very important that tonight we are considering the first step in potentially adding units to the Measure A pool through this process. But on the other side, any reallocation of these units out to a specific project area also require a general plan amendment. So we require the same process on the other side to actually allocate the units back out. It's quite a rigorous process. In terms of public outreach and next steps, should you authorize the initiation of these GPAs, we will be posting frequently asked questions and answers on our website. And then we'll be following, of course, all of the standard public notice requirements. That includes a notice of application by in several ways through several media that is required to be provided to property owners and adjacent property owners within 500 feet of the subject properties at least a month and a half prior to the first hearing. The Planning Commission will need to weigh in on this, provide a recommendation to you through a variety of media, mail. We obviously notify property owners by notices. We provide a large site on site. We notify HOAs within a mile radius, and we publish an ad in the newspaper. All of that happens at least 2 weeks prior. Then the commission hearing and recommendation, which will then lead on to the same notification process for your hearing on the item. And then should you decide to introduce the zone change ordinance and the GPA resolution, then there would be a follow-up meeting to actually adopt the ordinance, a second reading. We anticipate that these steps would be completed by April of this year. So with that, staff is recommending that City Council adopt a resolution to initiate these amendments to the general plan land use map for the designated areas, and also to authorize conforming zone changes. Should you decide to proceed with this, then staff will bring a resolution back for ratification of your action tonight at the next regular city council meeting. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions. Also to my left, Peter Gilley, Deputy Director of Community Development, and Jeff Spector, Senior Planner, who also contributed to this report. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Town. Questions from the council for staff? All right. Mr. Price.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Town, when you're referring to the Kelly Road property, is that the school district, formerly school district property, or the other property there on Kelly Road behind Coles?
It's the previous school district property.
Okay, thank you.
And any further questions from council? All right, we have a number of speaker cards. Oh, Mr. Adam, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Just for a little history on all this, if I may, back in '96, Measure E passed, and to put it as simply as I possibly can, it stated that any land use change that cumulatively resulted in an increase in density beyond which was permitted in 1996 by a general plan would have to go to a vote of the people. Correct? More or less?
That is correct.
Okay, good. We've never had to go to a vote of the people yet.
That is also correct.
Okay, all right. And in fact, since then, back in 2004, the City Council appointed a committee to take a look at Measure E and try to interpret it as best they could. It consisted of a couple of council members, some planning commissioners, and the city attorney. And no net increases had been detected, but the committee did suggest that net decreases in density could be, through a general plan amendment, allocated to our bank. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So that was in 2004. That was, 14 years ago. And since then, we've had different additions to the bank because of these net decreases, have we not?
That's right.
Yeah. One, for example, if I recall, I think I was on the council at the time, was the Chappelle property. That was about 2 years ago or so.
Time flies. A little bit longer than that.
Was it? Okay.
About 4 years.
It's been a long journey. And just real briefly, tell me how that worked.
Well, we considered and processed a general plan amendment from industrial to high-density residential, and that had to do with providing capacity for potential housing. Later, because housing opportunities existed elsewhere, that was reversed to industrial again. But it is representative, I would say, of multiple decreases in density throughout the city, and there's actually 10 decreases, 8 increases, to always ensure that we never exceeded that threshold that existed in 1996. So that's just one example of a whole series of general plan amendments that we have processed since 1996.
And many of them resulted in net reductions, thus creating units that could be added to this bank to be reallocated later, correct?
That's correct. We've always had units in the pool for potential reallocation since the original allocation, which was in 2002.
So this whole concept of net reductions is nothing new. What may be new is that ultimately we decided that maybe it would be a good idea to look at the entire city and do an inventory of just where we stood as far as density versus what was built and what could have been built. And that's where we are tonight, looking at some of these units that are a result of that, correct?
That's correct. I mean, historically, we looked at these general plan amendments more on an ad hoc basis,
right? Not
on a comprehensive basis, and that was the whole focus of last year's analysis. It was robust, it was holistic, and it gave us a picture of really what the capacity is in the general plan, and a full picture of areas as I just outlined, these and others, that were developed at an entirely lower category, but the process had already been followed many times prior to last year's analysis.
Right. We've already followed the process. We set the precedent. We just never took a full inventory. So let me just ask you point blank, by taking this full inventory, coming up with these units and what we're talking about tonight, does that any way undermine the original intent of Measure E?
No. It is entirely consistent with the letter of Measure E and the intent of it. The overarching goal of Measure E, if I can try to summarize, is to ensure that there is never any net increase.
Net cumulative increase.
Exactly. In the residential capacity that existed on November 5th, 1996. We have never exceeded that capacity, and these actions tonight, even coupled with potential actions out to reallocate the units, would still ensure that we never exceed that threshold.
And if we did, we would be bound to bring it to a vote of the people.
Absolutely.
But we're not.
Correct.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Town.
Ms. Bill de la Pena.
Thank you. If I may piggyback on what Councilmember Adam said, in 2004, when we had the committee, it was 2004, I believe. The committee made a recommendation to the council, which led to the banking. The committee, of which I was a member, was never presented with a baseline analysis. So neither were the voters in 1996. So this baseline analysis is the result of the recent study which was done last year, presented to the council on October 24th. The reason we have never increased or gone beyond the net was because the baseline is not realistic, nor is it practical, namely 80,000 units. And that is a baseline that will never be reached because it simply can't. We cannot accommodate that. So, and staff acknowledged that the baseline of 80,000 units was not a realistic one. So my question is, we have currently 557 units in the so-called bank, 24 for the Thousand Oaks Boulevard, and then 433 citywide. Those units do not include the 1,800 units which are allocated for mobile homes. Say somebody were to close a mobile home, then they could build units, but then they would apply these particular units from the 1,800 units in the mobile home park pool of Measure E. So that's a whole different number out there still, and it's a large number. When we came up with perhaps looking at a number of 10% of the overall bank that was now potentially increased, 1,088. I don't think we're taking into consideration any state density bonuses. So if you take 1,088 units, you could potentially increase that by 35%. In that case, that would be, what would that be, 1,400, 1,500 units, which is a lot more than it sounds with 1,088 units, the state density bonuses. The other point I want to make is that the while we cannot question the intent of Measure E necessarily with perhaps asking for a vote of the people to increase the units in the bank, certainly we could ask for the residents' advice. Do you agree with adding 1,000 units to the bank that could potentially lead to a 35% increase with state density bonuses? So while not necessarily technically falling under Measure E, I'm thinking an advisory vote is something that can potentially also resolve the problem that I'm having, namely the public trust. I sat on the committee. We were never presented the numbers, the baseline, and 20 years later, after 1996, and then more than 10 years later, after the committee was formed and made a recommendation to the council, we now, well, it's all legit, nonetheless have a different picture. So perhaps that's more of a question for the city attorney, I'm not sure, but is that something that could be done?
Thank you, Councilmember Bill De La Pena. The question with respect to the intent of Measure E is largely irrelevant after an ordinance is adopted. You have to look at what the language of an ordinance says. So if you're looking at, when I vote on something, I might think that it means it's going to do something, and I could be right or I could be wrong. But when we're looking at implementing or enforcing an ordinance, we have to look at the actual language of the ordinance. And that's exactly what staff did back in October. We looked at the actual language of Measure E and determined what the baseline was. Councilmember Bill De La Pena, you are correct. In 2004, the committee did not have that baseline information. And in fact, it was acknowledged in the memorandum that you authored with your fellow committee members that you don't know what the baseline was. And I think that that's been talked about quite a few times over the years. But I do want to reiterate that even in the 2004 memorandum that was authored by the committee, it clearly states that, the implication that cumulative could allow several amendments to occur as long as there is no net increase above the baseline general plan of November 1996 is central to the committee's suggested options. So from there, you have an understanding as to what the language of Measure E says. And that's exactly what staff looked at, was what did the language of Measure E say, and does our analysis go against any of the previous opinions and memorandums that had been created by either staff or city council? And there was no change. There's been no change. From day one, although we didn't have the baseline analysis, we did ensure that there were no reinterpretations. We looked at the plain letter of the language. So when you're asking for an advisory question, you can't ask, when you voted for Measure E, did you intend this? Because that's really irrelevant at this point. So what you can do, if you want to adopt or put forth an advisory opinion, you could ask whether or not you think the city council should amend what the baseline should be. Again, Measure E, until it's repealed, is the law. So an advisory vote can't repeal Measure E, and the baseline is set forth in Measure E. Hope that answers. It's kind of long-winded, but hopefully that answers
it does, because, and I'm glad you mentioned the baseline, because the baseline of 80,000 units, again, is something that is simply not realistic. We've all acknowledged that never, I mean, we would have a population of over 200,000 people or so. And as was pointed out, I think in one of the letters in the supplemental, the goal was not to ever reach a population that would be that high. And so I certainly appreciate that. That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bill De La Pena and Ms. Noonan. Mr. Adam.
Well, thank you, Mayor Fox. I see the point about the density bonus, but I'll say this. I think everybody understands that Thousand Oaks could use more affordable housing, as do most cities in the state of California. And if a developer's applying for a density bonus, it means he or she is also applying for affordable housing. And so it's a bit of a trade-off. They get to build a few more units, but we also get the affordable housing that we're looking for, because we as a city cannot build it anymore. The state of California took away our redevelopment agency a number of years ago, don't have the money for it. Neither does many mansions or the area housing authority. So we are dependent on builders for affordable housing. So it's a mixed blessing, I guess you could say. A little bit more density, but we get the affordable housing that I think we desperately need.
Any other questions, Mr. Price? Oh, questions. All right. I do have a question. Ms. Bill De La Pena brings up a good point with respect to the density bonus could add to the total bank. the question I would have of staff is that either way, every project has to apply for a general plan amendment, correct?
That is correct.
So there's no guarantee, and that general plan amendment essentially has to go through then the whole planning process. It has to go through staff review, planning commission review, ultimately back to the city council. And let me point out, it also has to go through the pre-screening process that council has set up and the community, to where the community, city, everybody actually gets to preview the architectural renderings, certainly the general design of the project, which would include the proposed density bonus. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So in a hypothetical, you could have more units, but essentially there's at least 3 public processes: the preview by the city council to allocate provisionally the units, the planning commission review, and then finally a public hearing for the city council. 3 different public hearing processes of which the public can weigh in, review, opine, and provide input to the council on whether they think it merits use of those units, whether they're a density bonus or not. Is that correct?
That is correct. If I may, by having a pool, it really gives you the ability to demand the highest quality projects, because those units are limited and there's competition, and you can demand a project that meets community needs, as you did before with regard to the Pinecrest school site.
Now, from a procedural standpoint, let me ask the city attorney, the general plan amendment, would that be incorporated into the council pre-screening process, or would that be yet another public hearing process?
The actual general plan to allocate the units?
Yeah,
it's a separate process. I mean, you would, for instance, if there are units available to be reallocated and a property owner requests certain units through a general plan amendment, they would go through a pre-screening process to identify and articulate how they want their project to look and the units that they would be requesting as part of that. Typically, they will request for concurrent processing of a general plan amendment, zone change if necessary as well.
Okay.
And everything would go through pre-screening, then it would go to Planning Commission, and then back to the City Council.
So I was corrected. There's actually 3 different public processes, public hearings, if you will, that the community can look at, and that's really independent of whether there's a density bonus or not. That's what we've talked about back to October, is that there is many hurdles for somebody to overcome to use even a single unit in the processes the city has put together, and the public's part of all of those processes. Is that correct, Mr. Town?
Yes.
All right. Couple more questions from council. Now, Mr. Price, you did have a question, then I'll go to Ms. Bill de la Pena.
Thank you. Ms. Bill de la Pena has made the point that the 81,000 units, that theoretical number that we all heard and I think took a very deep breath at. You say it's not attainable, but I have to ask, because I take exception to that statement, that it is not attainable. It is certainly not something we want to see here, but in 56 square miles, given the topography that we have, it is certainly capable of handling that number of housing units, is it not?
What that number represents is the sum of the actual land use designations for residential development as shown on our general plan land use map. It's the sum of those areas.
So at the time the general plan map was put together originally, our forefathers envisioned a much larger city than what we have now. Is that a fair statement?
It envisioned,
or allowed for it?
Well, many areas, as I mentioned, were developed at an entirely lower density category. But there were many areas that were developed at a lower density, but within the range that's shown on the general plan land use map, which again is actually quite common. The 81,000 figure is a product, literally a mathematical calculation based on that exhibit. We have about 48,500 units in the city today. That's actually what we have on the ground. Again, the way that we've tracked it, although as Councilmember Villapena appropriately points out, we didn't have the baseline analysis back in 1996, but because of that, we have, again, very carefully tracked every general plan amendment so that if somebody wanted to increase the density in one area for a project by 20 units, they could not even consider that unless there were already 20 units in the pool from a decrease somewhere else. There always had to be that. Right. The decrease always had to be greater than the numbers that are being requested. So it enabled us to it was really sort of an accounting approach that enabled us to ensure compliance with Measure E.
And as I said, I don't think anybody here, either up here or in the audience, envisions that many units here in Thousand Oaks. But I say that it will link to some of my comments later on this evening. So thank you for the answer, though.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Price. Ms. Bill De La Pena.
Thank you. Yes, and by the way, our infrastructure wouldn't be able to support probably more than 5,000 units to begin with. If we were to add 15,000, as was presented at the October 24th council meeting, that would our sewage treatment plant would be at beyond capacity. So we can't even do that. However, the reason I mentioned these other numbers is because I was looking at potential sites, and it appears to me that currently we have enough units in the so-called bank to satisfy some of the potential applications that could come before the council. And if those units were to add the state density bonus, because we need to provide affordable housing, that is an absolute must, then each application, each parcel could potentially have, close to 200 units. And I don't think that any of the applications, well, at least I hope, from what I've seen or heard, wouldn't go beyond that. So that's why I'm saying that it appears to me that what we currently have in there in the bank would satisfy any application that would come before us in the next 2 years or so or more.
So just a quick comment. So in the staff report, we did identify 3 of those 6 sites from the economic strategic plan that in combination could theoretically require about 600 units. But beyond that, it becomes so speculative for us as staff to try to estimate how many units could be sought. We are constantly contacted by, and this has been going on for years, by individuals with concepts for potential development, but it depends on so many factors. Some obviously go forward, many do not. But it's really, as we wrote in the staff report, it's incumbent upon these applicants to, come forward with an actual proposal, and then we would know. But there is significant interest out there, and we added that. We calculated that number for the staff report just to provide a bit of a point of reference based on 3 sites. Maybe 600 units could theoretically be sought in addition to the units that we have today. So it's sort of a guessing game in terms of how much demand is out there, but we are contacted on a regular basis. When I say we, staff in the community development department, by potential applicants looking at various properties and discussing potential options going forward. But anything beyond that is pretty conjectural on our part.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go to the speaker cards. As I call your name, please come up to the podium, and I'll call the couple of cards so you can start moving your way down so we can move through the speaker cards very, very smoothly. Our first speaker is Rick Lemo. Following Mr. Lemo will be Matthew Feinup, and after Mr. Feinup will be Sandy Smith. Good evening, sir.
City staff, my name is Rick Lemo, and I'm a resident of Newbury Park. The San Fernando Valley. Well, I want to congratulate our city council tonight and the city council of the past 30 years that I've lived here. The San Fernando Valley. First, due to concerns about us becoming the San Fernando Valley, Measure E was written by Mayor Fox. Because of concern that Measure E, that we would become the San Fernando Valley, Measure E was passed by the citizens of Thousand Oaks. Good news. It is a physical impossibility for us to become the San Fernando Valley. So finally, the sky was not going to fall, and we have not become a place where traffic is going to be bottlenecked on our boulevard, or hundreds of thousands or a million people were going to live. Because of Measure E, our growth was controlled, not by City Council, not even by the person who wrote the measure. It was controlled by us. Now, some of us were here and were able to vote for it. Some of us are brand new, but the laws are the laws, and we just can't ignore the fact that those were passed. There is no vote or further input needed because we voted for this, and as I had mentioned once before, sort of like a poker hand, the law is very easy. It plays itself. The analysis was done very well. The language speaks for itself, and I think it's important to remember that with the same responsibility that our general plan was created, people went and voted for Measure E, or what they understood Measure E to be, but they voted nonetheless. If we don't like the outcome of a vote, doesn't mean that it should just be ignored and we should not pay attention to it. Let's also remember that there is an unspoken safety net in regards to this measure or any other measure, and that is our City Council. Our City Councils of the past have done a very good job of being stewards so that we don't go crazy with growth. For any of you that pay attention, there are dozens upon dozens upon dozens of developers and builders that want to come here to Thousand Oaks. And they know no matter what they build, they can fill it up and be successful. But that hasn't happened. We're more than 1.1 million or 1.5 million below that scary San Fernando Valley. We have a wonderful quality of life, and now we're being responsible and won't add more than what our ordinance allows, what the system permits. And so for that, I thank you and ask you to accept staff's recommendation and vote for it tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Lemo. Next speaker is Matthew Feinup, followed by Sandy Smith. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. My name is Matthew Feinup. I'm a resident of the city of Ventura, and I work here in Thousand Oaks as the executive director of the Center for Economic Research and Forecasting at California Lutheran University. In October, when the Measure E Housing Bank was previously considered by this council, I spoke then about the broader economic context that we find ourselves in. I remind those here today that the most recent data from the Department of Commerce indicates that Ventura County suffered a significant recession in 2016, and together the years 2014 to 2016 represent the slowest period of economic growth of any 3 consecutive years for which we have data, worse even than the financial crisis and the Great Recession. Local employers are communicating explicitly that a lack of building and the resulting housing affordability crisis are to blame for downsizing and relocation. Ventura County's decline has been led by a loss of nearly $1 billion in economic activity per year in non-durable manufacturing, the single highest paying sector in our economy. The biggest economic story since that meeting in October is the Thomas Fire. And beyond the initial impacts and the considerable heartbreaking personal losses that were suffered, because the Thomas Fire exacted so much damage to homes, the fire has further squeezed the existing housing stock and will drive affordability even lower. My team at SURF, at CLU, expects to see this pattern across the county, not just within the individual cities that fall along the fire perimeter. In this way, the fire will exacerbate the very problem which was driving the county's economic decline. So the need for additional housing is more acute than ever, more acute even than last October. And so I strongly urge the City Council to initiate amendments to the general plan land use element and support the addition of units to the Measure E Housing Bank. I also want to take a minute and express my personal gratitude to the City Council and to City staff for the excellent work that was done to assess the maximum number of housing units which are allowed under the original language of Measure E. That work and the recommendation by staff to add additional units to the housing bank are a real bright spot in the regional economy, and I hope that other cities will follow suit, pursuing proactive approaches to the extreme housing challenges that we face. This is a deeply personal issue. I'm a member of a two-career household trying to live and thrive in Ventura County. My wife actually has to leave the county every day and commute to LA County to find a job that allows us to afford home ownership here. In fact, she commuted to Orange County for 2 years to make that happen. So this is a personal issue, and so I express my personal gratitude for the unique conversation that we're having here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sandy Smith, and following Sandy Smith will be Janie Schmidt. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mayor Fox, council members, staff. My name is Sandy Smith. I'm a 67-year resident of this county and a third-generation resident, so I can say that there is no such thing as a no-growth strategy. I'm here this evening wearing a couple of hats. First, as the current chair of the Ventura County Economic Development Association, but also as a senior adjunct professor at Cal Lutheran University, where I teach classes in the master's program in public policy on urban planning. First, as chair of VICITA, an organization that has represented the business community in this county for more than 60 years. Recently, our members have identified the lack of affordable workforce housing as the #1 issue they face in not only attracting employees, but retaining the ones they have. I might point out that Amgen has a seat on our board. The challenges we face in this region, one of the most least affordable places to live in the United States, are faced by the state of California as a whole, as reflected in the over 200 bills that focus on housing in the last legislative session. Regardless of the new mandates as a result of that legislation and those yet to come from Sacramento, Thousand Oaks has housing needs of its own, a need to respond to workforce housing, as previously mentioned, but also to a new generation of workers and residents. This demographic seats not an alternative to large single-family detached homes built in years past. They seek an environment, this demographic, where they can not designed around the car, where they have the option of walking to cafes, coffee shops, and retail establishments in proximity to their residences. This type of built environment and sense of place also allows for another element to be important to this population, the availability of transit. By initiating the recommended actions by your staff and by earmarking housing allocations to the infill properties, you provide opportunities for not only affordable housing, but to respond to the needs of this demographic. You also move to invigorate and implement your previously approved Thousand Oaks Boulevard plan. I urge you to support staff's recommendation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Janie Schmidt, followed by Greg Van Ness. Good evening.
My name is Janie Schmidt. I've been a resident of Newbury Park for over 24 years. I'm here today because of my love for Thousand Oaks and the vision that we had hoped for Thousand Oaks of being a unique city and not like one in the valley or what's happening out in Camarillo, which once was a beautiful land. I don't know if any of you have gone out to see what's happening in Camarillo. They have packed in acres and acres of high-density apartment buildings, condos, not just one story, not two, but three, and they're everywhere. Now, is this what we want for Thousand Oaks? I don't think so. And I think I'm very disappointed in the council for taking what people wanted in Measure E and twisting it to change what was intended with Measure E of keeping our city unique. I'm very disappointed in this because when you have legal counsel, we do not have legal counsel. And what we voted for during that time was for low density living. If you go down, and I hope all of you go down Thousand Oaks Boulevard and see that almost everything there is 1 or 2 stories high. At night, you can see the mountains. You can see a beautiful city. And now what's being proposed in this, according to what's in the Acorn, are these 3-story high buildings that you want to call multi-purpose units. This is not what was intended for Thousand Oaks. We had Dos Vientos put in. Do you know before they put that in there, it was a vision of, I think the founders of this city wanted, where there was wildlife, where you could look up and see the stars at night, not packing in multi-level buildings all over Thousand Oaks Boulevard. I mean, look at Mendocino. It's so beautiful. Or Montesino, I'm sorry, and it's near Santa Barbara. It's all 2 stories, and it's gorgeous. You have to realize when you start building multi-level buildings for high-density multi-use, it's going to ruin everything in Thousand Oaks. You can't even go on the freeways anymore. And now that, I mean, Camarillo, I don't know how many units they're putting in there. There's going to be a lot of places for people to live.
Thank you, Ms. Schmidt. Thank you. Our next speaker is Greg Van Ness, followed by Doug Menges. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. I'm Greg Van Ness. I'm a resident of Westlake Village, and I'm also here tonight as CEO of Tolman & Weicker Insurance Services, which is the largest insurance brokerage operation in the county. I also serve on the Workforce Development Board of Ventura County. I am a board member of the Cal Lutheran Center for Economic Research and Forecasting, School of Management Advisory Council, and I serve on the Ventura Chamber of Commerce Board as well. I commend the council for asking staff to come up with the analysis and bring what appears to be a very balanced recommendation forward. As a resident of this community, as someone who lives, and works in this area, I have a great appreciation for everyone's interest in quality of life in this community. I certainly spend a lot of time in Thousand Oaks and a fair amount of my family's money here, and I also have a very strong interest in a healthy economy. As Matthew pointed out, we can't say that this county's economy is in healthy shape. And some of that has everything to do with an imbalance in the housing supply. As one of the larger employers in this county, and as a business owner of that firm, we are constantly faced with trying to attract quality talent to serve our customers, many of the businesses in this community and throughout the county. And it is challenging to get people to come into the area. In fact, many of our team members commute in from outside the region to work for us because of the lack of affordable housing. And it's a challenge for all of the businesses that we serve as well. As the largest insurance brokerage in the region, we serve businesses in virtually every business segment represented in the community and in the county. And I can tell you that it's very difficult for the clients we serve to expand their business and attract talent, whether it's biotech, technology, high-quality manufacturing, as Matthew pointed out. I'm sure you're all aware of these challenges. What's being proposed is not going to throw the quality of life in this community or the housing balance out of balance. As Mayor Fox indicated, there are clear process controls on any general plan amendment for any development that will be proposed. So for those who would love to preserve what was Thousand Oaks 40, 50 years ago, that ship has sailed. And if we want a healthy economy that's not only good for all of us with gray hair who love the rise in housing prices that we enjoy, but for those of us who are also parents and have families and want to employ young people who bring vitality to this region, I think it's important to support the additional 1,080 units as part of the Measure E Housing Bank. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to this issue today, and I certainly am in support of this recommendation by staff.
Thank you, Mr. Van Ness. Our next speaker is Doug Menges, followed by Steve Dyer, followed by Linda Brownswager. Good evening, sir.
Thank you, Mayor Fox and council members. My name is Doug Menges. I live in Westlake Village, and I work in Thousand Oaks for Many Mansions, which, as you've referenced tonight, is a nonprofit affordable housing developer building homes for working families and veterans here in Ventura County. I am here tonight to speak on behalf of Many Mansions in support of the request, which would, as you know, just add over 1,000 units, which would begin the process to add to the Measure E pool. Adding these units provides a much greater chance of building housing for all incomes in Thousand Oaks, while Many Mansions specializes in building multifamily rental housing for income levels that are typically in the 35% to 60% of average incomes. All kinds of housing, including market rate and affordable housing, will benefit Thousand Oaks. This past year, we have completed rehabilitations on 3 of our properties located in Thousand Oaks: Villa Garcia, Shiloh Gardens, and Shadow Hills. Several of you were kind enough to attend our grand openings, and I thank you for that. Those 3 units house 200 working families just in and of themselves. And we're also trying to build new construction. We currently have new construction planned or ongoing in Moorpark, Oxnard, and Fillmore. And we would love to build more housing here in Thousand Oaks. I understand the concerns that are expressed around this topic, namely traffic, trees, water. But well-built housing, as we provide, addresses those concerns and is not the evil that some describe. We believe that housing in infill areas reduces traffic, as workers who now must drive from somewhere else could walk, drive a short distance, or take the bus. And our housing, built with super high energy and water efficiency, saves resources. Finally, adding more housing, even just market rate housing alone, will have secondary benefits to our population. There's record rent levels now. There's approximately $2,300 per month for a 2-bedroom apartment, which in turn pushes low and even moderate income families toward us, increasing our housing waiting lists, which are now measured in terms of years, not months. More housing will ease this pressure, lower rent levels, and allow more households to afford existing housing. In conclusion, Many Mansions supports the request to begin this process. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker is Tom Cohen, followed by Steve Dwyer. Oh, sorry. Hold on, I might have skipped.
It's okay.
We'll let Tom go.
Steve, you go. What order do you want? Steve Dwyer.
Okay, go ahead, Steve.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Steve Dwyer. I am the Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity here in Ventura County, and I'm also a resident of Thousand Oaks. Many of you know that Habitat for Humanity is an organization that develops, builds, and advocates for affordable housing as an important factor in healthy families and vibrant communities. You know, I found it interesting when I continue to look at the data that, according to the California Association of Realtors Housing Affordability Index, in the second quarter of 2016, according to their data, 33% of households in Ventura County could afford a median-priced home of a little over $600,000 at that time. Only a year later, in the second quarter of 2017, that number had fallen to 27%, 6 percentage point drop
in 12 months. Our housing affordability is roughly on par with San Diego County, LA County, but actually that drop was 3 times the change that was seen in those other 2 counties as housing prices go up and wages don't move very fast. So Habitat for Humanity certainly develops and builds homes around the county. We've built homes in Thousand Oaks in the past. We're currently developing 6 homes for sale in the range of $225,000 each in the city of Oxnard in the La Colonia neighborhood. And we certainly see that an increase in the housing supply here in Thousand Oaks will accommodate new residents, and importantly, it will allow for a variety of housing types and styles, and in doing so should allow for a variety in the pricing of these housing units. And so in addition to supporting the increase in supply through this review and this measure change, we also appreciate the comments that were made and encourage the City Council to ensure that as housing units are considered and approved over time, that there is a great consideration to ensure that new housing units support all income segments. I'll also just take a minute and speak as a resident. I have been back in the county for 5 years after graduating from Cal Lutheran back in the 80s. I have 2 college-educated young adults, one of whom is a graduate of California Lutheran University only 4 years ago. And I happen to be one of those families where both of my kids now live in Texas. And I will tell you that we are a family that you should want to attract these kids as college-educated contributors to this community over the coming decades. And yet, unfortunately, there is no question that the high cost of housing is the single greatest disincentive for a young adult to build their life here in Thousand Oaks because, frankly, it's just a tough place for these kids to get started when the cost of housing, on average, median price is over $600,000. And so I encourage, and Habitat for Humanity encourages, the City Council to approve this measure, and I agree as a developer of properties, there are plenty of controls in place for a poor development. And so, taking that, I think this is a very, very balanced and measured approach to increasing housing here in Thousand Oaks. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. All right. Linda Braunschweiger, followed by Tom Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council members, City Manager, and staff. My name is Linda Braunschweiger. I'm the CEO for the Ventura County Housing Trust Fund. As some of you may know, the Housing Trust Fund, we leverage public, private, and charitable funds into a revolving loan fund for the development of affordable housing. And as you know, the City of Thousand Oaks is a financial partner at the Housing Trust Fund, and we really look forward to the opportunity to be able to invest in a development in this city. In the last 10 years, according to a 2017 report from HCD, California had built 80,000 homes a year, but they were expected to build 180,000 every year. A very, very small amount of homes were actually built from what was predicted from 2015 to 2025. As you know, and as you've expressed here, as a community, we must plan for affordable housing. It is an integral part of our community's future. The lack of affordable housing puts our local economy at a very competitive disadvantage. As all of you know and has been said prior, Southern California is among the highest in the nation for the cost of housing. But we can't turn a blind eye to the fact that there's also an extremely severe shortage of housing for our community members, particularly those in the extremely low-income category. According to the 2017 Dyer Sheehan Group rental survey, in 2013, Ventura County rents for a 2-bedroom was $1,552. Mid last year, those rents had escalated to $2,023. The Civic Alliance reports in their State of the Region report that a 2-bedroom apartment for Thousand Oaks was $2,049. So at that time in 2016, you were already the highest in the county for rents at an average of $250 more a month than other cities. I think I heard somebody say that now the average rent here is $2,300. The vacancy rate in Ventura County has been a minuscule 3%. and that's due to the limited supply and the strong demand. With this limited land for new development and the lack of public support to approve high-density infill projects, the supply of new housing has really been a very, very slow trickle. Meanwhile, housing prices have risen every year since the recession ended and show no signs of reversing their course anytime soon. Ventura County is becoming more like our neighbor to the north, Santa Barbara. Wealthy retirees and residents who bought in a market decades ago can afford to live there, while younger working families can no longer afford to live there. Ventura County Housing Trust Fund, we strongly encourage the City Council to increase the number of units being built and that are in your Measure E pipeline pool. We welcome the opportunity to assist you in funding some of those developments, and we certainly are supportive of your leadership in this area as we address this critical need for more affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Cohen, followed by Chase Rashid.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members, City staff. My name is Tom Cohen. I'm a 56-year resident. I live in Newbury Park, and I have 3 daughters and 2 grandkids. The reason I say that is 2 of my daughters live out of state. I have a high school student here at Newbury Park, but the others can't afford to live here. That bothers me. I think what we've heard tonight, a lot of data. That data really backs up the point that's being driven here, which is we need the housing. The study that was done by staff, the baseline analysis, I think is above reproach. It's a mathematical equation. It's a fact. The fact that this study was done nearly 20 years after Measure E was adopted, better late than never. It needs to happen. And the market forces that are in play right now, not just from a housing perspective, but also from the employment base that we have here. I'm concerned about the businesses that are here are having to evaluate whether or not they can stay here because we have people that are moving, that are traveling from out of the area to come into the area, which creates other impacts to our quality of life that we expect and demand. The last point I want to make is I am absolutely confident that this council and future councils are going to ensure the residents of Thousand Oaks that our quality of life will remain at the high standards that we all expect, that traffic will be studied, that air quality impacts will be studied, that impacts to our oak trees will be studied. You've identified a process that will give the community a great opportunity to come out and speak and weigh in on these projects. And I know that that the quality that you guys expect will be, the developers will have to come to the table with projects that you guys can support. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So I urge you to accept staff's recommendation, move this forward. The only thing that I would add is I'm not sure 20% of the units that you identified is enough. They're there to be had. I would suggest you think about that. Maybe this is just a first step in the evaluation, and we'll see how this goes. And maybe a couple years down the line, we'll come back and look at that. But other than that, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Chase Rashid will be our next speaker, followed by former Planning Commissioner Marilyn Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Chase Rashid, City of Thousand Oaks. Now, when this came up initially, I said I was in support of it because we do need more affordable housing now. I voted for SOAR. I convinced a lot of people would otherwise have skipped over it on the ballot because they didn't know what it was. I convinced them to vote for it because I felt it's an important measure. I think we have controlled growth well. I believe in controlled growth. This, I think, is in the parameters of controlled growth. If there's a concern about the density bonus, let's see if council would be willing to take a percentage of these units and allocate them just for affordable housing, so that takes some units off the table for market rate. More housing will drive down the cost of rents. You know, when you have, that's the way the market works. More competition creates lower rents, and that is definitely one of the reasons that we have a shortage of housing. Is why we have higher rents is because there's a shortage of housing. There's a shortage of affordable housing. We need workforce housing. Santa Barbara has workforce housing. They put up some. It did not affect the skyline. They did it they did a very low building. They have created workforce housing. There's veterans housing going up in Oxnard. I can speak to the fact that there is a shortage of affordable housing. I live in affordable housing. The waiting list there, the amount of people who want to get into my complex is longer than the amount of people who want to get an invitation to Prince Harry's wedding. It's just that long. The area housing, they opened up their list. They got thousands of applications, and obviously all those people are not going to be able to be accommodated. And the units that are on the table here, they're not going to be able to accommodate everyone, but we've got to accommodate some people. And yes, as I said, I'm for controlled growth. I see some of the people I know that are for controlled growth, and I just want to let them know I'm not backing away from that. I'm very much for controlled growth, but there has to be a compromise, and that goes for the developers too. There has to be a meeting in the middle. So work together, meet in the middle. We need affordable housing, and we need controlled growth. So let's find something in the middle. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rashid. Our next speaker is former planning commissioner and longtime resident Marilyn Carpenter, followed by Christine Cano. Good evening.
Hello. Nice to see you all again. I'm here to talk about what many of us perceive as a betrayal of the public trust. Measure E was welcomed, strongly supported by the people in this community. And what is perceived now is that you have drafted an end around a way to avoid what was promised to the voters. My question for you is, what are you afraid of? If you are here to represent the people who live here, and if you are here to do what most of us would prefer you do, you wouldn't be taking this tack. If what's being proposed is so desirable, then let's put it to a vote as was promised to us years and years ago. Anyone who has served on the Planning Commission knows that, particularly with this strategy you're using, any of us who's been on the Planning Commission, and you and I served together, Mayor Fox, knows that projects that are proposed don't always get approved as the proponent would prefer. Often there are constraints on land that preclude developing at the maximum density that might be allowed. There are height restrictions, there are oak trees on property, there are market forces, there are so many reasons why these properties have come in under the density that is allowed, and this seems like a back alley way to thwart what was really intelligent planning and approval at the time. So I'm honestly so deeply disappointed in the actions of the council. I think that a promise is a promise, and you made a promise with Measure E, and now that promise is being broken. And if you were all that we hope for, you would put it to a vote. If it is desirable and if there's a good rationale for doing it, then let the public decide. You're here to do the public's bidding, really, not impose your views on the rest of us. But really, I'm stunned at this effort to circumvent that Measure E vote. Finally, I want to acknowledge that I am one of those 8 former planning commissioners who signed a letter and that was submitted to you folks and is in your packet. So don't do it. As I thought about what to say, I thought, why would the council commit political suicide? Because if this goes forward as it's proposed, the public will rise up. The public has spoken before, and they would hope that the council would honor their commitment to us. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Carpenter. Christine Cano.
Mayor Fox.
Oh, sure, Ms. Bill.
I pushed the button. Okay. I have a question for Mrs. Carpenter. I'm sorry to make you walk back to the microphone.
I'm getting old and I don't walk as well as I used to.
Could you speak directly into the microphone? This way
I
we'll
will
be
try.
able to
Yes,
hear you
I
better.
shall.
Thank you. That's much
Yes.
better. I see that you referenced a letter in the
Yes.
supplemental packet. You're one of 8 authors of the letter to the City Council regarding Measure E.
Correct.
And in this letter, you are asking that the banking system, which was not part of the original Measure E
That's
vote on the ballot, should be disbanded or abandoned, I should say. Can you elaborate on that? Why
Well,
it should be abandoned and what should happen in its place?
Well, I think it's just the banking system is a reinterpretation of what Measure E might have allowed. So you've created this end around having to go to a vote by identifying properties that have been developed, as I understand it anyway, that have been developed at lower densities than they actually have on paper. So my neighborhood, for example, was not a part of this first group of neighborhoods that will be handled. But essentially, what you're saying is that you're going to come in and because we did not develop at the full development at the full densities that might have been permitted. And what I wanted to say, perhaps I said before, I should write this down, but unfortunately I'm not smart enough to do that. When our properties were developed and when other properties are developed, there are constraints on the land. Rarely does a project get approved that maxes out the density. Most developers know enough not to push for that, and the city has historically said there are other constraints. We've got slopes into which you can't cut. We have oak trees on the property. We have neighboring developments with which what you're proposing would be incompatible. So there are a lot of reasons why those properties were not developed fully.
Thank you. And lastly, you say that the city has reached a threshold for a vote, and you name a population of, what is it, 135,000?
Well, that was what was projected back when Measure E was approved, and now the game has changed, and I think the public will not respond favorably to that. And it just a warning. I think as I said before. The public will be up in arms. We're already hearing it. I happen to go online, and I'm not techie enough to be able to go back and find these, but I read a litany of young people commenting on promises made, promises not kept. This is not the Thousand Oaks that we bargained for, that we voted for.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Christine Cano, followed by Sean Meridian. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Christine Cano. I've lived in Thousand Oaks for 15 years. I live in Shadow Oaks. I'm here in support of recognizing the housing capacity that's inherent to the general plan, and I thank you for doing the analysis of Measure E. I'd also like to note that I am excited about the new mixed-use projects that have been approved for Thousand Oaks. I've lived here since 2002, And I think it's a beautiful place to live and a wonderful community. And we would like to bring more of our family here, and we've been looking for over a year, and we can't find anything in their budget or that fits their needs to live in Thousand Oaks. I also work in Thousand Oaks. I'm lucky I do not commute. I work at Cal Lutheran, but I know many people, including recently hired faculty and staff, who cannot find a place in Thousand Oaks that they can afford to live, and they commute, as well as people who have commuted for 10 years from Ventura. And this commute into work actually, causes issues when there's traffic and affects our effectiveness at work, especially on days like today with the rain and the closure of the freeway, and during the Thomas fire and the evacuations. People not living in this community can't get to work, and it affects our productivity at work. I'm also a student in the Masters of Public Policy Administration program at Cal Lutheran, which I've met many students there who have degrees and they have careers, but they're in search of a higher degree to earn more money so they can afford to live in this community. They don't live here and they commute in. And coming to school at night at 7 to 10 from Ojai and Santa Paula and Oxnard and Ventura is a burden. Also, the class that I took, the housing policy class, raised the awareness that the housing shortage that we're experiencing here is actually a statewide crisis, actually nationwide. But I was struck also by the statistic that Linda Braunschweiger mentioned, that the California Community Development Department projected we needed by the year 2025 1.8 million more housing units, or 180,000 units to be produced every year for 10 years. And as she said, we've only been on average producing 80,000, and a shortage of 100,000 in the state is causing a housing crisis. So I think Thousand Oaks is a beautiful place to live, and I think that with the added units, that this gives us an opportunity to provide more housing for more people to live here. And the Planning Department and the Planning Commission will continue to do a good job reviewing and considering the rural characteristic of this city. And I want to thank you again for the potential of new housing in the area.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Sean Meridian, followed by Chuck Cohen.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and honorable council members. Sean Meridian. I'm president of the Thousand Oaks Boulevard Association and chairman of the Property Owners Business Improvement District. I'm a proud lifelong resident of Thousand Oaks. This is where I was born. This is where I was educated. This is where I learned to work. I got my first job here. And this is where I've been running my business for the past 20 years. This is home. I have a deep love and appreciation for this community. And like many of my fellow residents, would do anything to protect it. My comments this evening are my own as a resident and not as a representative of TOBA. With that said, TOBA has outlined its position in our letter submitted to you. Naturally, TOBA and its members support any measured effort to increase needed housing within the city of Thousand Oaks, regardless if it takes place within the specific plan or not. Our city is facing a housing shortage that needs to be addressed. TOBA recognizes that the issue of housing is larger and beyond Thousand Oaks Boulevard, and thus we extend our support for any effort to provide this community with the housing it needs. I believe the City Council took the initiative last year during its goal-setting meeting to start a process that it acknowledged was needed. The subsequent hearing on October 24th and tonight's hearing are continuations of a commitment to address a housing need that has thus far, by every objective measure, reached a tipping point. The countless reports by local economists, independent consultants, large employers, our school district, our workforce, and our own economic development strategic plan all evidence that the need to correct the massive housing imbalance that has been created over the past 20 years. I believe the council will vote for their own initiative this evening and move this process forward tonight. Therefore, I'd like to take the opportunity to direct my comments to my fellow residents, those in attendance tonight, those watching at home, and those who read about this in tomorrow's Acorn. My fellow residents, allow me to express my thoughts and concerns regarding the imbalance our community is facing. My comments are not meant to discredit and or oppose your opinions, which I do respect, but rather I'd like to provide an alternate point of view. Hope that it will be insightful and provoke thought and curiosity in you. First off, allow me to make clear that I do not believe our current city council is to blame and are responsible for the predicament we're in. The sensitivity to housing in this community goes back decades. Unfortunately, now it's reached a point that can no longer be ignored. Our housing shortage is not about Measure E. It's not about circumventing the vote of the people. It's not about changing the density or character of Thousand Oaks. It's not about, the issue before us is correcting the imbalance that has been the byproduct of decades of deviation from that general plan. Countless residents and proponents of Measure E begin their comments with the saying that the great job and vision our founding fathers had when they envisioned this community. However, they omit the fact that the master plan community was designed for 180,000 residents, not the 130,000 we currently have.
Mr. Meridian, you got to wind it up.
30 seconds.
Nope. You got to wind it up.
Okay. I support the initiative. Thank you.
Very good. Nice job. Chuck Goen, followed by Tina Frugoli. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, council members. Chuck Cohen of Thousand Oaks. Maybe one of the founding grandfathers. Let's put it that way. I take exception to the whole issue that's being discussed tonight, and I do so on this basis. This issue is not about housing. This issue is not about promises never made. This issue is not about false statements about the maximum number of units that were ever promised to the community. This issue is not about amending Measure E. Measure E is what it is, and it remains what it was when it was adopted and still is today. And after you take action on this tonight, will continue to be the same Measure A with all the same terms and conditions within it. What this hearing is about is an implementation of the duty of this council to, after 20 years, fully implement the intentions and the term, not the intentions, but the terms of Measure E by conducting the inventory that you directed staff to do. That should have been done many, many years ago. I commend you for having the courage to do it now. I support what you're doing, and I fully support that you continue to function appropriately and in concert with the terms of Measure E.
Thank you, sir. Tina Frugoli, followed by Joan Edwards, followed by Janet Wall. Good evening.
Hello again. My name's Tina Frugoli, and I grew up here in Thousand Oaks, and I'm here to ask you to please respect the intent of the voters who voted for Measure E. Do not change the general plan and zoning for the purpose of skirting a vote. What staff is calling reallocating units is basically taking development rights of one property and giving it to another without compensation. I'm sure most property owners will not want their property downzoned without having a say and without compensation. My units are not available. I don't want my units taken and given to a developer for a high-density development. That doesn't seem fair or legal. Some staff and council members are telling us that the state of California will penalize Thousand Oaks if we don't add more residential units. State requests should not be used to skirt a vote of the people and downsize areas of our community. It seems that if the council was truly concerned about the state, they would be requiring real affordable housing units, which they clearly are not. That is not happening. When I see this desperate push to get units in the so-called bank and avoid the vote of the people, Avoid the will of the people who live in this community and voted for Measure E. I can't help but wonder who you are doing this for. What is the rush? Why are you working so hard to take away the rights of your community? Who are you representing? Do not amend the general plan. This is clearly for the purpose of getting more units into the Measure E bank so high-density projects can later be approved without a vote. Please respect the intention of your constituents.
Thank you. Joan Edwards, followed by Janet Wall, and our last speaker will be Nick Kidwai. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Fox and council members. I'm Joan Edwards. I live in the Westlake Village portion of Thousand Oaks. I want to read to you argument in favor of Measure E, which is signed by Andrew P. Fox, Mayor, back in 1996. It reads, "We urge you to vote yes on Measure E. The city's general plan has served the community exceptionally well. Following the general plan, our city has become an attractive and desirable place to live and to work. The general plan assures that as the city builds out in the future, our development is balanced and open space is preserved in perpetuity. Measure E is needed because the voters should have the power to vote yes or no when significant changes to the general plan are proposed. Our plan now has a balance of residential and commercial land uses, and our services and facilities have been planned to provide for this development. If a landowner or developer wants to change our general plan to allow more commercial development or a higher residential density range than the plan now allows, we think that only you, the voters, should make that decision. The City Council recently adopted an ordinance to give the voters the final say for any proposed change to the parks, golf courses, and open space, which would have been SOAR category. Help us finish the job by protecting our community by approving this additional safeguard, which gives voters the final say on any changes which would increase the commercial and residential categories. Help us prevent our valley from becoming another San Fernando Valley. Vote yes on Measure E. Signed, Andrew P. Fox, Mayor, Judy Lazar, Mayor Pro Tem, and Michael Markey, Council Member. All these people who have come tonight, landowners, developers, people who own land on Thousand Oaks Boulevard who want to see it developed, they all make wonderful arguments to you. Let the voters decide. Let's have a debate. Let these people speak to the voters. Let's vote on the next developments over the ones that are now in the bank. I voted in 1996 for Measure E. I trusted you. Now I feel betrayed. If there's going to be a change in our city, let the voters decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. Janet Wall, followed by Nick Kidwai.
Good evening. I'm Janet Wall, a 32-year resident of Thousand Oaks and also a former planning commissioner. It may come as a surprise, but I agree additional housing units in our city might be a good idea in the next few years and could definitely vote for worthy projects. What I can agree with is the dishonest, deceptive manner in which you plan to secure those units. Last October, staff brought forward a baseline of 81,124 housing units using a general plan maximum density scheme. As staff freely admitted, 81,124 housing units cannot be physically accommodated. Yet that bloated, unrealistic figure is now on a pedestal, and 4,500 of those 32,000 fabricated units are believed to be up for grabs. The baseline methodology is flawed not merely because it uses the maximum general plan density, but because it maintains that maximum general plan density could have occurred, dating back to 1970. To rely on that bogus number as baseline fact, you must believe those fabricated units were considered by past city councils and were left on the table for you to use today. With all due respect to the wizards that occupy this building, fantasy does not belong in city policy. As an example, please look at Site 5 in your packet. Bridgehaven is a pocket of 38 homes on 35 acres within a 30 to 40% sloped canyon off Potrero Road. It was approved in 1989. Attachment 5 in your packet says you can bank 87 units from Site 5 because 125 units were possible under the maximum general plan land use designation. At that 1989 hearing, Mayor Fiore and council wisely scaled back Braemar's application for 45 homes to 38 by considering potential impacts from the floodplain, steep topography, and lack of alternate emergency access for future residents. 125 units wasn't on the table, so you cannot transfer 87 unused units to someone else today. In my mind, your doing so disparages the hard work and findings of your esteemed predecessor council members. They were not remiss when they didn't pursue maximum general plan density on this or any other project. Please don't use fantasy in city policy. In closing, I agree with Andy's 1996 sentiment about our anticipated Measure E vote. There is no better way than to place the keys to the city's future in the hands of our citizens. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Our last speaker is
Mr.
Nick
Fox.
Ms. Bill Pena. Sorry about that.
I have a question for Janet Wall. You are also one of the authors in the letter in the supplemental packet. And you referenced a memo from 1996.
Mm-hmm.
You are saying that addition of 2,947 more residential units that the city has already allocated for development. The city's population will grow beyond the 135,000 it was intended to. Where exactly? I couldn't find that number, so I was hoping you could help me with that.
You know, there is a footnote. Here, let me find it for you.
But it does say that the build-out projection was for 135,000, and that in
That's
addition
correct.
to the Measure Bank would
and actually,
go beyond
that number is from Mr. Fox's memo.
Okay.
And that 135,000 population reflects roughly what the units are that have been built over the history of our city from 1970 to today, the units that have been built in the last, 23 years, from 1996 to 2017, the units that have currently been allocated but are not yet built, plus the units that are unallocated.
Okay.
Those numbers are very clear. Okay. And this is what Measure E was about. It is not about the fantasy that staff has given you.
All right.
And I agree. It's very clever. It's cunning. Thanks.
Our last speaker is Nick Kidway. Good evening, Mr. Kidway.
Good evening, good old mayor, city council. Nick Kidway, resident of Newbury Park, director concerned city of Thousand Oaks. First of all, I would like to admit that I'm not very bright. I was expecting something. I mean, ever since October, my head has been spinning. I don't understand what all this is. In 25 years, I learned about zoning from this city, where RPD 5 to 15 meant 5 units to 15, not what is 407 units that you can get on last recess. It's completely different language that you're using, and what I've learned is that if you want to fool the people, you just make things so that they don't understand what is happening. I mean, but on the other hand, on the measure, I would like to point out that the slow growth people were opposed to the Measure E, and they called it Zena said it's a measure exception. So, and I did not vote for Measure E or SOAR because I don't trust the politicians. I trust myself and the other people. And so that has been proven. What is needed is managed planning. That's what this is, and that's how we have failed. In 70s, 80s, anybody who spoke about low-income housing was booted out, and there was a roar. That's why Dos Vientos, there were no apartments put there, no small homes. I live in a 1,600 square foot home. No 1,600 square foot single family home has been built here or in Orange County anywhere, because one of the reasons is that these units, big units, are more profitable. And I am sick of hearing this thing that my son cannot live here. I mean, nobody has promised you a golden California like at McDonald's, that you go in line and pick out your house and live happily ever after. But people are making progress. And what is happening is in the 50s, Thousand Oaks was the boonies. People worked in Hollywood and they lived here, McRae and these other people. And now what is happening is that the center is moving north. I mean, near Santa Ynez, Santa Maria. That's where the cheaper homes are. Nipomo, at the beach. So there are solutions. I don't like this negative talk, and we have to respect the property rights of people.
Thank you, Mr. Gidway. That concludes our speaker cards. And tonight is a staff report. So we'll go back to staff for some follow-up comments and then any further questions for staff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few comments. Staff is not reinventing Measure E in this process. We are looking at it exactly as it was written, exactly as it was adopted. We have been following this process the past 22 years. We're not adopting a new process. The whole idea of a bank and units going into it and out of it only occurred through general plan amendments since 1996. There's no new process here. All that we have done is look at Measure E comprehensively. And if we talk about the promise, quote unquote, of Measure E, I'd like to go back to the ballot language that many of us considered. And that is, and I quote, "Shall the ordinance be adopted requiring voter approval of any change of the city's land use element of the general plan, which change increases the net allowable residential density or total commercial acreage in the general plan?" That is the language that voters voted on. It was net allowable residential density, and therefore the bank is an entirely appropriate accounting mechanism to ensure that we do not exceed the threshold that existed in 1996. I should also mention that if these units are added to the Measure E pool, again, it's a very rigorous process, as I know you appreciate, to potentially reallocate those units out to any project. That project has to go before you in terms of a pre-screening review, Planning Commission, and then back to you for final approval. Finally, I would just like to note that if these 1,088 units are indeed added to the Measure E pool through this current process that you are deliberating, compared to the number of units that are in the city today, it would add a little bit over 2% in terms of the number of residential units. It's a very modest number. It will not affect SOAR. It will not affect our open space, which is about 40% of the city's area. Those will all remain in place and go forward. So I would just like to wrap it up by saying that our approach is not a reinvention of anything. It's consistent with Measure E and consistent with City Council's direction in 2005. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Town. Questions for staff? Ms. Bilda La Pena.
Thank you. Mr. Town, an example was given about a very difficult to develop parcel where realistically high density could not be done because of topography. So And I think the issue that I'm having too is from past parcels or past developments to use units that could realistically never have been built on a given parcel, now transferring over to another. If the committee in '04 had never made that recommendation, where would we be today?
Well, the committee, the 2004 committee identified 3 options for City Council. Identified the option of having concurrent general plan amendments to essentially allow an increased density in one part of the city and a decrease in another. That was one option. Another was to create a measuring bank, so to speak, with a time limit of, say, 5 to 10 years. The third was to create a measuring bank with no time limit. Those were the 3 options that were forwarded by the 2004 committee to City Council. Those options were evaluated by the city attorney. She wrote an opinion and a recommendation, and that went forward to City Council on June 14th, 2005. That recommendation, which Council adopted that evening, was that, again, it was 2-parted. Any proposal that would exceed the threshold of density that existed in 1996 had to go to a vote of the people. Nobody is disputing that. But at the same time, that Council had the right to approve a project as long as the overall net density was not exceeded. It's the flip side of the exact same point. That is exactly how we've been interpreting it over the years. I fully recognize that properties have constraints, that they could have drainage courses, they could have steep slopes over 25%, they could have oak trees. Clearly, those are part and parcel of everything we see around our community. But Measure E was written exactly based on the premise that I stated in the action that went before voters, and that was a net increase. And so, as long as the capacity in 1996 has never exceeded what we have been doing for 22 years, has been entirely consistent. It's been with the letter of Measure E, it's been a very slow, methodical, consistent, measured approach. Now staff has identified potential areas to process through the general plan amendment process, as we have done before per your direction. And those units could potentially be added into the pool, but there's nothing new here. It's exactly how we've been doing it.
Regarding density, we have secondary dwelling units that can be built. That's going to add to density. Have those units, potential units, been factored into the increase in population and density?
Under state law, those cannot be factored in. The accessory dwelling unit ordinance that you passed last year, those units, if somebody builds a quote-unquote granny flat in their backyard, it does not count toward Measure E, does not change.
So beyond what would be allocated tonight, we'll have additional units that cannot be counted toward the Measure E, or only be counted toward the increase in population, really, because of the fact that they're exempted by the state.
That's correct.
And there could be hundreds of those, correct?
There could be. We're not seeing an avalanche of requests, but there could be.
And I'm also looking at the low-income units, because I've heard the word affordable housing a lot tonight, but really most of the units will be market rate, which are necessary too. But a low income to very low income will be far fewer, right?
Yes, the majority of units that would be added through any of this would almost by definition be market rate units, which obviously added to the overall pool of units tends to decrease prices, but it is the affordable units that really address those that are lower income, and by that we typically see units provided that are 50% of the area median income and below are the target residents that applicants are considering these days.
Thank you.
All right, any questions for staff? All right, this is a staff report, so Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Noonan needs to provide some also follow-up comments.
Thank you, Mayor Fox. Just wanted to provide some information and some response to the letter that was received and discussed tonight by the 8 former planning commissioners. I think they raised two arguments. The first one was that the banking system should be abandoned because it doesn't. It's nowhere found in Measure E. I think Mr. Town did articulate this, but I just want to make it clear that the banking of units is really just an accounting method to ensure that the 1996 baseline is not exceeded. Remember, the Measure E is based on cumulative net changes, and so there needs to be a way for staff to keep track of any general plan amendments that come before it. So staff has called it a bank, other people call it a pool. Regardless, abandonment of a banking system or calling it a bank doesn't change the baseline analysis that was prepared by staff, and nor does it change the cumulative net approach that's set forth in Measure E. With respect to the assertion that the city has met the threshold for a vote based on population, respectfully, from a legal perspective, I disagree. Again, the threshold is based on the net residential density as it existed in the general plan land use map on November 5th, 1996. Again, that baseline determination was never determined until October of this year. So the Measure E itself is based on the density projections and not on population projections. A question was also raised whether downzoning someone's property without permission or compensation is legal. And the question to that is, yes, it is legal. Property owners don't have vested rights to a particular zoning. So as long as you have economically viable use of your property, it is a legal possibility for city councils to amend zoning codes on land throughout the city. This happens in all cities throughout the state of California, and actually probably throughout the United States. The last question was whether why are we proposing this right now? And I've been asked this question quite a few times. I've had conversations with our staff and I've had conversations with our public. But from a legal perspective, it's my job to know when a vote is required. I have to know that. I have to ensure that the voters' rights to a vote are protected. So I need to know at what point that comes. I also need to know at what point are we requiring a developer to submit their project to the voters. I have to be confident that the point in time where a planning staff tells a developer, a property owner, that they must take their project to a vote of the people, I have to be on very solid legal grounds that we're not sued based on that determination. So the question as to why have we gone through this analysis? Why has staff done this? The question is because it's good practice, it's good policy, it's good government to have the answers to those questions. It's important for the city council, the city attorney, and city staff to know at what point do the voters have a right to have their projects voted on. And in order to do that, we had to look at what Measure E said, we had to look at what the baseline was, and we had to do those calculations. So that's why this is happening right now. That's all I have.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Noonan. All right. We have a staff report with a recommendation to initiate the amendments to the land use element. And the chair is open for discussion and or motion. Mr. Price.
I guess I'll start it off. This action that we're contemplating here this evening is entirely in keeping with Measure E, the letter of the law. And we are not in a position to circumvent the law. This is being done pursuant to a legal opinion rendered by our city attorney, as you just heard. There's been a lot of talk about affordable housing here today, and without that market rate housing, there will be no affordable housing. It's just not going to happen anymore here in Thousand Oaks unless and until we start building the affordable housing and requiring developers to make, the market rate housing, and requiring the developers to make affordable housing part of their projects. The two projects that we've given conditional tickets to for a number of units have each come to us with a proposed number of affordable units, and we have, in each case, asked them to increase that number. Do I think that in each case we will get the developers to build and get the state density bonus of 35%? I can only hope that would happen. There are continued assaults at the state level, and like it or not, when the state passes a law up there, it's not a suggestion. It's not something that we're being asked to do. It's something that we're being told to do. And I want to read to you one such, just very briefly, one such bill that was presented this year by State Senator Scott Wiener, SB 827. This would entirely abolish and would require that all new housing construction within a half a mile of a train station, and I recognize we don't have a train station, or a quarter of a mile of a frequent bus route, would not be subject to local regulations concerning size, height, number of apartments, restrictive design standards, or the provisions of parking spaces. Ladies and gentlemen, Sacramento is not interested in what we want down here necessarily. There are already bills that have been passed that have taken away our ability to restrict building development here in Thousand Oaks. And if we're not careful, the state will impose it on us. They have so much said so. So one of the speakers asked what I'm afraid of. Well, I'm not really afraid of anything. I think that this is the right thing to do. As the mayor has mentioned several times, not just tonight, but in other hearings related to this matter, we will have a number of bites at the apple here. But the public will be involved in each one of them. They will be invited to come down and speak and take a look at the projects and weigh in. And some of them will get approved, some may not. So I'm really not afraid of anything. I don't know that we will ever build the 1,088 that are contemplated or that are before us tonight. If we do I think it's going to change the fabric of our city? The answer to that is no, I don't. I do not. I think we'll be a better city, a more vibrant city, one that will be welcoming to younger people, but new businesses. It will cause or allow our existing businesses to thrive, and it will make us better. The alternative is to shrivel up and impose higher taxes on those of us who live here. That's how you pay for services when you don't have any development going on and your business community is not thriving. So I, for one, am in support of the staff's recommendation and moving forward with this. And I guess I'd like to hear from my colleagues before making any further comments or a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Ms. Bill De La Pena.
Thank you, Mayor Fox. We knew, or at least this council member knew, that this would be a very difficult, challenging topic, given that our city has a unique character, and that character obviously needs to be preserved. Speaking for myself, having been on the committee which came up with recommendations as to how to quote-unquote bank units, I never in my wildest dreams would think that we would end up tonight with a somewhat controversial decision. We didn't have, as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we were not given a baseline. We didn't ask for a baseline. Neither did the voters in 1996. So when staff came and said, okay, we need to really look at what is truly available, then I was certainly surprised. The thought of using units from other projects that could never be built and then allocating them to another project, to me, sounded somewhat uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable, but nonetheless, I believed that an analysis was long overdue. I'm glad that staff did the analysis. I don't think the analysis is flawed in any way. What I am having a problem with, though, is the fact that it's taken so long, 20 years, then 10 years we worked with a completely different number. And when you hear that number being thrown out year after year after year, I thought we had only 600 plus units in the bank. All of a sudden, it's 5,000. That is a shock. That is not something that can be ignored. Do I think that we don't need to provide housing? Certainly not. It's been painfully clear that we must provide additional housing. Probably more importantly so, we need to afford or provide low-income to very low-income housing, really. And as Mr. Price said, there won't be any very low-income housing if we're not allowing moderate income or market rate apartments. So we are in a dilemma in that we have to provide additional housing as per the employers in our town and trying to preserve the character at the same time. A lot of the units that we have in the bank now, as I mentioned, would satisfy future applications that would come before the city because we still have hundreds and hundreds of units in the bank, so to speak. But it must be said that a lot of the numbers will be concentrated on Thousand Oaks Boulevard, from Duesenberg over there perhaps to the Nazarbekian project. Thousand Oaks Boulevard will be impacted. Now, the comment has been made that this is a very small increase to the population, to the density and all that, because Thousand Oaks is 55 square miles. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Except that the density will be concentrated in one area, and that is where it will be felt. Traffic, infrastructure, it will definitely be felt on Thousand Oaks Boulevard. And my preference would be to let the projects that have been approved go through the process. And there are three projects now that have been approved, one of which is under construction already, and see how these projects, should they go, make it all the way to the end, should they be built, how are those projects doing? And I think that interested developers who want to invest in Thousand Oaks and provide the necessary housing and entertainment and amenities would look at those three examples to see, should I build there? Should we do that? Is it worth it? Are they successful? And I think we do have time for that. We have at least 3 years to do that. I personally, while we did on October 24th, say that let's start or look at 20% of the units of the 5,000 something units. To me, that wasn't something that said, yep, we're going to do 1,088 units. That was, we're going to look at it, we're going to evaluate it, we're going to have staff come back with recommendations, then we're going to see how the process should work, and those additional steps will be brought before the council, I think, by April. So why do we need to do it now? Do we need to do it with 1,088 units? No, I don't think so. Can we get by with half that? Absolutely. Should we, if we want to do 1,088 units, should we ask the people for advice if that is something that we should do? I think that is something we should do as well. I wouldn't be afraid to ask for an advisory vote. In fact, I am very much in support of providing additional housing. I would be a proponent of building at least 500 units. But I feel a fiduciary duty because having been on the committee, having made the recommendation, I have a fiduciary duty to allow the people to have a say in this, because we for many years thought the number was very different, the process was different, and personally I feel guilty about that. I do. It's just not, for me, not the right thing. For me, the right thing to do is to ask for an advisory vote. If we want to go to 1,000 or more, can we go less than that, 500? Absolutely. There's no rush right now. We're not having a long queue of developers saying, hey, we want to do this. Everybody's being careful. Everybody wants to see what's happening on Teal Boulevard. So, and elsewhere, Pinecrest, for example. I think we need to be extremely careful here, because there is an element, or there are residents in our town who are probably close to the majority, if not the majority, who don't want to see this happen. And I think we need to respect that. But we also need to respect the need for the housing that our employers have requested and the amenities they have requested. And I think there is a way to meet halfway. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Bildelfina. Mr. Adam, and then Mr. McCoy.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, for years, I thought I understood Measure E, and I knew there was a bank, and I knew there were units in the bank, and like Claudia, I thought it was a finite number of units. But I was wrong, because, so if you want to find any fault with this whole business, you've got to go back to prior councils and prior staff, in the sense that they never had the vision to really take an inventory based on Measure E and the intent of Measure E to find out just how many units there really were. So it's this staff and this council that had the political courage to step up and do that. And I think that's a very important step. And so, you know, do I believe that we need affordable housing here in Thousand Oaks? Absolutely. Do I think that staff has identified these opportunity sites where this housing might be placed, and it tends to concentrate along Thousand Oaks Boulevard, and it's not going to certainly impact any of our existing neighborhoods? Yes, I think that's true. Do I think that some of the biggest businesses and institutions in town want to see housing here in Thousand Oaks, whether it be California Lutheran, whether it be the Oaks Mall, whether it be Macerich, Amgen, you name it? I've been approached by all of them. That is true as well. Do I think that we're forcing young people out of the city? Millennials? Absolutely. Do I think that the freeways are clogged with commuters because they can't afford to live here in Thousand Oaks, and that's why the freeway's clogged from Thousand Oaks all the way to Ventura? I believe that's the case. Do I think that the state of California, as a couple of our council members mentioned, is going to come down hard on this city and a lot of other cities to build housing, and it could take away some of the ability that we have to make sure it's quality housing? Yeah, I think that could happen. Do I think this 1,080 number is actually relatively small? It's less than 2% of the housing stock that we have right now? Yes, I do. But I think what the real issue here is, it's not how these units may be used in the future. I don't know how they'll be used. I do know we have a very rigorous process to use them, and I do know that this council had enough foresight to put this process in place, whereby the council would look at it first, and then would go back down to staff, and then planning commission, and then come back to the council. Very rigorous process. But I think the issue here is, do these units, based on the precedents that have been set, based on the commission's report back in 2004, based on the staff's exhaustive analysis, do these units qualify because they are a reduction in the overall density to possibly go through a general plan amendment and be added to this bank? I think that's really the issue at this point, not how they're going to be used. I don't see where we want to reduce the number of units or increase the number of units based on what we perceive right now as the demand. The question now is, should the units be admitted to the bank through a general plan amendment? And my inclination is, yes, let's go through this process. Let's send it back down to staff, let the planning commission hear it, and then we'll come back up to the city council and work its way back up, and we'll decide that issue.
Thank you, Mr. Adam. Mr. McCoy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Measure E inventory, though it's taken a number of years to complete, is complete and it's clear. I think the timing is fortuitous considering the misery our county's endured with 1,000 structures destroyed, They count one structure as Hawaiian Gardens, which was 65 apartment units. Those are 65 families displaced. And here we are struggling over 1,080 units. A fair assessment of Measure E. I think tonight I heard the comment that if I'm to apply the law, I'll be threatened with political suicide by upholding that law and having compassion on these people. Our housing's been devastated by fires, landslides. And if that's political suicide, so be it. It may not be politically beneficial, but it certainly is compassionate and right. I am voting in favor of the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Here are my thoughts on what's before the council tonight. And fair enough, my name's been thrown around because I did author Measure E back in 1996. One of the speakers earlier this evening commented that this was not about some of the items that have been raised tonight, not just by the public, but by the community and the council as well. While I appreciate the collateral importance of issues as housing and economic development, affordable housing, that's not the purpose of tonight's hearing, and that's not the purpose of the action the council took in October. This is about the legal interpretation of Measure E. That's what it is. And unfortunately for some, they disagree with the legal interpretation. They disagree with what the voters voted on. When a measure is put on a ballot and people vote for it, that's a legal process. And that was done on purpose. Because as the author of Measure E, I did not want councils to be able to change a law that the people voted on. We're not changing the law. Despite what you might have heard, that's just simply incorrect. What we have done is we've looked at the inventory that existed in 1996. Many have talked about the legal aspect of Measure E, but I also want to certainly let the community know, from my perspective, who's someone who co-wrote the initiative, I believe we've maintained the spirit of Measure E. Measure E was written for two reasons. First, as I have said many times, there was a political debate back in the early 90s and even before that about the city becoming a San Fernando Valley. Those of us that were raised in the San Fernando Valley knew the ridiculous political argument that was, but it got traction. And council election after council election, slow growth folks kept insinuating to the residents of this community that developers were going to take over this city. History is a great lesson learner because that has simply not been the case. There are people here that spoke tonight. There were some of those folks that suggested that. They were wrong. They might have believed it, but history has shown that this city has grown at a very managed pace. And I'm proud of the fact that Measure E had a lot to do with that. Second reason I wrote Measure E was a policy decision. I did not want the city to outgrow its infrastructure. We have not done that. As Claudia pointed out, even with the 5,000 units that are in the bank, we would not outgrow our treatment plant. But if we went past that, we would have a problem. So on two counts, going back to 1996, Measure E has done exactly what it was intended to do, both legally and in the spirit of it. The process by which we've determined and staff has used has been vetted many, many times going back to 2001 when he had a city attorney's opinion on how we should calculate the cumulative net number of units in the city. It was also independently looked at, as Claudia pointed out, back in 2004 by a committee of council members and planning commissioners. I was not part of that process. Some of the people that are on that committee actually signed this letter saying you shouldn't follow Measure E. And so this process that the staff used has been looked at. The paper trail is a mile long on the process that we've used. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about the letter that I wrote to the council back in 1996. It's been referenced, and it wasn't referenced in its entirety. On the last page of the memo that I wrote to City Council as mayor in 1996, I said the best way to plan long-term community-defining decisions is in the hands of our citizens, to empower them to make the final decision regarding major changes in our general plan that would alter the city's future by allowing greater population and greater commercialization that would effectively change the constitution of our city. The action we're taking tonight is 2% of the total housing. These are not major changes. I also go on and write that if council chooses to do this, it would be required to do one of two things. First, concurrently reduce densities in commercial spaces elsewhere in the city. That's exactly what we've done for many, many years. Or second, submit the changes to a vote of the people. And I conclude the memo in 1996 with this. In my view, this proposed concept provides protection to our citizens while also providing flexibility on the many land use issues that occur on a frequent basis without requiring special elections, which cost in excess of $100,000. This paper trail goes back to 1996. The debate, while I understand it because the cumulative number the staff has come up with, I think surprised all of us. But it doesn't change the spirit or the legal aspect of what Measure E says. Finally, the 1,000 units was one of my proposals that actually came from Mrs. Edwards, who was a speaker against this proposal tonight. She indicated that she thought somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 units would be reasonable. And so 20% of 5,000 is about 1,088 units. That is a very conservative, reasonable, incremental approach. And finally, to my colleagues, we don't have to take any action on this. We are not required to make these general plan amendments. If we want to leave everything as they are, council has the ability to do that. Mr. Price talked about somewhere down the road. Council has the ability to do that. The speakers tonight were overwhelming in favor of this proposal. It's my sense, and I have a pretty good idea of this community, that at some point in time, if future councils decide to make successive general plan amendments, we'll be hearing from our residents. Not just letters to the editor, but people come down to the council meeting and let us know, hey, we need you to tap the brakes. That's exactly how Measure E was designed. It was to provide council the flexibility to make minor land use decisions that affect our community, which, as you've seen tonight, can be very complex. We're dealing with affordable housing, we're dealing with economic development, a number of things. But at its core, Measure E has done its job. We have not had a single general plan amendment for increased density in over 21 years. We have not outpaced our infrastructure, and we have grown at a very reasonable rate. In fact, I think we're probably one of the slowest growing cities in Ventura County. So I think the measure has done its job. It's not my intent to be defensive, but as the person whose name on it, I take a certain amount of responsibility for a measure I put on the ballot 20 years ago. It would have been nice to have the insight into going back and doing what staff did 20 years ago, but there's an old saying, hindsight's 20/20. But at its essence, Measure E has worked exactly as it was supposed to work. So we need a motion. Mr. Price, I think you're going to make a motion.
Thank you. I do just want to say one thing, and to my colleague, Ms. Bill de la Peña, I can certainly sympathize with you having been on that 2004 committee and being tasked with making recommendations based on insufficient information that quite frankly would have taken, from what staff has told me, years to be able to gather at that point. Time and computers made that certainly much easier for them to be able to do it here in 2016 or 2017. So I can certainly sympathize with you. And to Mr. or Mayor Fox's point, to further that point, in the intervening 21 years since Measure E was passed, there have been about 5,400 units built in the city of Thousand Oaks. That's an average of 248 units a year. I think that's pretty darn good, and I don't think there's anybody out there who would disagree with that. And I don't see anybody sitting on this council tonight that is going to back down from that. I think we will all remain vigilant, and while you may see a few more than 248, given that we've already given conditional approval for a number more than that, it is not going to be runaway growth that was so feared back in the 90s. So with that, I am going to moves staff's recommendation, and I think, I guess I don't need to read any of that into it. No? Thank you.
All right, Mr. Price moves the staff recommendation. Any further comments on the motion? Ms. Bill de la Pena.
Thank you. As I mentioned in my comments just a few minutes ago, I do feel a personal responsibility that, having been on the committee and having interpreted, so to speak, Measure E, I feel extremely uncomfortable supporting the motion when I really truly want an advisory measure from the people. Mayor Fox is right. We don't have to do anything tonight because truly we have enough units in the bank now. And we can wait to see how the other projects which have been approved, should they go be completed, how successful they are, and I'm sure other developers will want to then also weigh in on this and join them. Had it been a smaller number, half of that, I think that would have been great. The number to me, simply, while it has been described as being a small, tiny number, knowing that the concentration will be in one area, I feel very uncomfortable supporting this measure. It's not that I don't support affordable housing on the boulevard. It is simply the process, the personal responsibility, now having had a totally different number, and truly wanting the feedback from the residents, so I will not be able to support the motion.
All right, thank you, Ms. Bill de la Pena. Any further discussion on Mr. Price's motion? All right, hearing none, prepare the vote.
That motion passes 4-1 with Councilmember Bill de la Pena voting no.
All right, that is approved. Thanks, everybody, for coming down and for sharing your comments with the council. We'll move to item 10, that's committee, commission, and board reports. We have none. Item 12, council issues and recommendations. Any follow-up reports? Okay, with none. City manager, item 13.
Thank you, Mayor Fox. Our next regularly scheduled city council meeting will be held on Tuesday, the 23rd of January, 2 weeks from tonight. Currently, we have two primary items: the annual city council member committee assignments list and an economic development update. That is it for right now.
All right. No closed session tonight, and that moves us to our adjournments. And Ms. Bill de la Pena will handle our first adjournment.
Thank you, Mayor Fox. This particular adjournment hits very close to home. On December 14, Mark Tanner passed away while making an aircraft emergency landing in the Bahamas. Mark was a commanding cellist, led an active musical life spanning 4 continents and 4 decades. He was the principal cellist for the New West Symphony and has been the principal cellist for the New West Symphony since 2000. Mark also served as principal cellist for the San Diego Symphony, the Nashville Symphony, and the New Haven Symphony. He was principal cellist, featured soloist, and chamber music coach for numerous music festivals ranging from Colorado to Los Angeles to St. Bart's. In addition to his musical activities, Mr. Tanner was an executive of a medical device company, the chairman of an angel investment fund, and an active entrepreneur. In 2010, he and his wife, violinist Jana Lower, founded the Tropicordia Foundation with a mission to promote string performance around the world. The foundation engaged in a number of projects in diverse locations such as Cuba, Albania, and South America. Mark, on December 14th, and I'm going to ad-lib, I'm just adding a little bit more information, made a Mayday call. They crashed, he and his wife crashed, and as the plane sank, they tried to get out, but the impact into the water and hitting the surface was so strong that the doors became jammed and they couldn't open them. Mark pushed his wife out into the back where there was still air. There was an air bubble. She was able to open the hatch, get out, and she did. She swam to the surface, probably lost consciousness, but when she turned around, she didn't see Mark. And they searched, U.S. Coast Guard searched for Mark for more than 24 hours, I believe, 48 hours, and they couldn't find him. So Mark was a true leader and a musician, and he will be missed by family, friends, and colleagues, and music fans such as myself. My children, my son, and my mom and my husband always sat in the front row, and Mark was sitting in front of us for the last 5 or 6 years since we've been season subscribers. So we were very familiar with him. He was a true leader, a musician, and he certainly will be missed by family, friends, colleagues, as I said, and our best wishes go to Mark's wife, Jana, also, as I mentioned in the plane at the time, for her amazing courage and recovery. And the next New West Symphony concert will be, I believe, on January 28th. It's going to be a Saturday, and the concert will be a tribute to Mark Tanner. And at this time, we're going to see a short video of his performance. Thank you. That was Bach, the Prelude in D minor, I believe.
Thank you, Claudia. Our final adjournment tonight will be for our Mayor Emeritus, former Mayor Alex Fiore. Back in 2002, I asked the council to adjourn the first meeting of the year for every year after Alex passed away in honor of our Mayor Emeritus. For those of you that remember Alex, you certainly remember his 30 years of being on the city council. He was elected to 7 terms, served 6 terms as mayor, and was certainly one of the leading visionaries for our community. He was on the very first city council, and he served for the better part of 30 years. If those of you that were not in the community when Alex was on the council, I would just like to share with you a few things. Alex was one of those council members that whether you agreed with him or you didn't agree with him, he always had a rationale for why he voted the way he voted. And he did a pretty good job of explaining his perspective, his viewpoint. There was not a lot of gray area with Alex. He was a tremendous intellect, very bright gentleman, very good with numbers. In fact, as I've mentioned in years past, he used to put a card table out at the Jan's Mall on Saturdays, every Saturday, for 30 years. He was good with numbers. And back then, people would come and talk to Alex about various city issues, and some would even bring their tax returns to Alex, and he would prepare tax returns, something I wouldn't recommend anybody doing that today. But many, many things that we look at in Thousand Oaks have Alex fingerprints on them. The Wildwood Mesa, certainly our open space program, the city's general plan and layout. While he certainly wasn't the only one, he was the longest serving. And his fingerprints, again, his vision are undeniable. As you drive around town, you'll see various things that are named after Alex Fiore, and rightly so, because of his service and his dedication and his vision for our city. Alex was a guy that was supported by his family. Katie was always there. Katie worked for many years, volunteered at Los Robles Hospital. On a personal note, she wheeled several of my kids out after they were born. And so my family and the Fiore family have shared a great relationship. Also, his daughter, Norma, Tom, and Rick, all of them helped shape our community. And so with that, I'd like to also adjourn tonight's meeting in memory and in honor of our Mayor Emeritus, Alex Fiore. And with that, we will adjourn to our next City Council meeting for January 23rd, 2018. Have a great week.